This is a specialized internal training module for the IELTS Focus team. We're bypassing the usual pleasantries because we have a critical operational objective today.
We do.
We need to conduct a rigorous audit of how we are delivering our classes. Specifically, we need to look at how we're preparing students for the exam and really professionalize that process. We're doing that by synthesizing two distinct frameworks. We are taking the methodology of Jeremy Harmer, specifically his ES model, and we're colliding that with the assessment principles of H. Douglas Brown.
It's a necessary collision, I think. The structural weakness we often see in the education sector and, specifically in test preparation centers like IELTS Focus is that instructors tend to treat teaching and testing as separate islands.
Completely separate.
You have your teaching days where you explain grammar or vocabulary, usually standing at the whiteboard. And then you have your testing days where you just hand out a paper, set a timer, and kind of sit back in the corner.
Right, you become a proctor, not a teacher.
Exactly. The goal of this deep dive is to bridge those two islands. We want to create a high-performance classroom environment where the testing methodology actually, drives the teaching methodology.
Exactly. We are looking for coherence, total coherence. If those two islands remain separate, the student never learns how to apply the theory under pressure until it's too late.
And by then they're in the exam room and the money is on the table.
Precisely. So here is the roadmap for this session. First, we're going to break down Harmer's ESA model. That's engage, study, activate. We need to understand not just the elements, but the sequences, specifically the difference between straight arrows and the boomerang.
A crucial distinction.
Then second, we're going to unpack Brown's 5 core principles of assessment: practicality, reliability, validity, authenticity, and watchback. And finally, we're going to land on the synthesis. This is the takeaway: a specific directive on how to apply that boomerang sequence to maximize authenticity in our mock testing scenarios right here at the center.
Let's start with the methodological core then. Jeremy Harmer. If you look at standard teacher training, particularly the older models like CELTA or Trinity certifications from maybe a decade ago, we often heard about presentation, practice, production, PPP.
Oh yeah, PPP. It was the gospel.
It was, but it was also very rigid. Harmer broadens this scope significantly with ESA. It stands for engage, study, activate. And it is absolutely crucial for our instructors to understand that these aren't just steps, they are ingredients. You can mix them in different orders.
That's the key right there, the flexibility.
It is. And the first ingredient, engage, is the one that is most often misunderstood or, frankly, skipped entirely in a high-pressure environment like IELTS prep.
Right, because when we say engage, I think a lot of teachers here entertain. They think they need to be a clown, play a game, or do something, frivolous just to wake the students up.
That's a huge misconception.
But Harmer is very specific here. He talks about the hearts and minds concept. It is not just about fun, it is about emotional involvement. He makes the observation that students learn significantly better when they are not just paying attention, because let's be honest, you can pay attention while being completely bored, but when they are emotionally hooked.
Precisely. You can force attention. You can say, look at the board or stop looking at your phone. You can mandate compliance. But you absolutely cannot force engagement.
No.
Engagement involves curiosity, maybe passion, or at least a genuine desire to know the outcome of something. Harmer notes that if a student is switched off emotionally, the cognitive channels are. They're just clogged. Nothing goes into deep storage. It's all surface-level memory.
So in an IELTS context, engage might not mean playing a vocabulary game.
Probably not. It might mean tapping into the very real anxiety or the ambition they have regarding their future university placement. It's about making the context matter before you drop the grammar hammer.
I like that, the grammar hammer. It's so true. That distinction is vital. Engagement in an exam prep context is all about relevance. It's about saying, this next hour, this task, this determines whether you get into that university in Sydney you've been dreaming of. That hooks them.
That's the hook.
Which brings us to the second element, study. This is the traditional teaching phase. This is where we focus on the construction of the language, grammar rules, specific vocabulary, pronunciation patterns. This is the comfort zone for most of our instructors.
It is the comfort zone, yes. It feels like real work. You're at the board, you're explaining things, the students are taking notes. It looks and feels like what we imagine teaching to be.
It's what people expect.
It is. But Harmer offers a very sharp critique here. He notes that while study is essential for accuracy, it just cannot be the entire meal. He gives the example of a 45-minute drill. If you spend an entire class period just drilling a specific past tense form, I walked, I talked, I played, you are focusing 100% on study.
And you might feel very productive. You've covered the past tense.
You might think you're being rigorous, but Harmer argues that this leads to a lack of coherence and ultimately a failure of learning. The students might be able to parrot the form back to you, but because there was no engagement and, crucially, no activation, it doesn't stick. It becomes abstract math rather than, actual communication.
It becomes data entry without understanding the software. It's useless information. And that leads to the third element, which is the one that test prep often starves. Activate. This is the stage where students use the language freely. And freely is the operative word here. It's real-life tasks, role plays, discussions, or full practice essays where the focus is on meaning, not just on form.
And that distinction Harmer draws here is so vital, and it is often where teachers really struggle to let go. In the study phase, the teacher is the controller, right? You're correcting every slip. You're modeling the perfect sentence.
You're the expert at the front of the room.
Exactly. But in the activate phase, the teacher must step back. You have to take your hands off the wheel. The focus is on communication. Did the student get their message across? This is where acquisition actually happens, when the learner has to marshal all their linguistic resources to solve a problem in real time.
And if we don't have that activation phase, we just have students who know about English but can't do English.
That's the perfect way to put it. They can diagram a sentence on paper, but they can't order a coffee or argue a point in a debate. They have the knowledge, but not the skill.
So we have the ingredients: engage, study, activate. Now, how we mix them is where the strategy comes in, the architecture of the class. Harmer outlines a few lesson sequences, and the most common one, the one probably 90% of teachers use by default, is straight arrows.
Straight arrows is the linear ESA. It's very simple. You engage the student, maybe with a picture or a quick question like, what did you do last weekend? You teach them the rule in the study phase. Here's the past simple tense, subject plus verb ed, and then you have them practice the rule in the activate phase. Now write 3 sentences about your weekend using the past simple.
It's a straight line. Engage, study, activate. It's the classic textbook approach. Today we are learning the present perfect. Here's a rule. Now turn to page 74 and fill in the blanks.
It is. And to be fair, Harmer admits it has its place. It can be very effective for, say, elementary levels or for very specific, discrete grammar points. If you just need to teach the difference between can and can't, a straight arrow approach is probably the most efficient way to do it.
Okay, so it's not evil.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But the critique is that if this is the only shape your lessons take, it becomes incredibly predictable. And as we said, predictability is the enemy of engagement. Students can see it coming a mile away.
They know the script.
They know the script. And furthermore, and this is the critical flaw for an IELTS context, it assumes that the student needs the study phase before they can even attempt the task. It assumes they are empty vessels just waiting to be filled with your knowledge.
Which is never true. They always bring something to the table. Which brings us to the alternative. And this is the one we want to highlight for the IELTS Focus team. The boomerang.
The boomerang. The sequence changes to engage, activate, study, activate, ESA.
So it starts the same with engage, but then it flips the other two.
It does. The boomerang is essentially the task-based learning approach. Let's look at the sequence. You start with engage, as always. You set the stakes, you make it relevant. But then, instead of teaching the rule, you go straight to activate.
You throw the students into the deep end.
Immediately. You give them a task, say a role play of a job interview, or in our case, an IELTS speaking part 2 card, and you just say, do it. You don't give them the vocabulary list first. You don't review the grammar first. You just say, perform.
And that must sound completely counterintuitive to a lot of traditional educators. You're demanding performance before you've given them the tools.
It does, but think about the psychology of it and the diagnostic power. The students will struggle. Of course they will. They'll make mistakes. They will stumble. They will have these huge gaps in their vocabulary where they're reaching for a word they just don't have.
You can see the panic in their eyes.
You can, but, and this is the absolute key, while they are struggling, the teacher is observing. The teacher is diagnosing. This is a needs analysis happening in real time. You are seeing exactly where their actual ceiling is, not where you assume it is from some textbook.
So that first activate stage is really for the teacher, not just the student. It's a data collection phase.
100%. It informs everything that comes next. Which leads us to the third step, the study phase. But now, the study phase isn't just a generic lecture you planned last night.
No, it's targeted. It's based on the crash and burn they just experienced.
It is reactive and it is surgical. The teacher addresses the specific gaps that were revealed during that first activation. You can say, okay, everyone, I noticed many of you struggled to describe your past experience politely during that interview role play. You all said, I want job. Let's look at the grammar for polite requests using modal verbs.
And at that point, the students are hanging on your every word.
They are listening intently because they just failed at that specific task. They have a hunger for the knowledge because they see the immediate utility of it. They have a problem. You are now handing them the specific solution. It's not abstract anymore.
And then to complete the boomerang, we go back to activate.
Step 4, activate again. The students redo the task, or a very similar task, but this time they are applying the new knowledge. This closes the loop. It confirms the learning.
It's the proof.
It is. Now, this places a much higher burden on the teacher because you have to be adaptable. You can't just read from a script or a PowerPoint. You have to respond to what the students actually produced. But it ensures that the teaching is meeting immediate, demonstrated student needs. It turns the classroom into a workshop rather than a lecture hall.
Harmer also mentions the third sequence, the patchwork, which is a mixed sequence, like what? Engage, activate, study, activate, and then maybe another study, another engage. It's more flexible, but maybe harder to control.
Right. Patchwork is probably the most realistic model for how we actually learn. It's chaotic. We drift in and out of focus. We try things. We learn a bit. We try again. We get distracted. We come back. This is very common in intermediate and advanced levels, where you need to balance the flow of a topic with these little moments of linguistic study as they pop up.
A teachable moment.
Exactly. But for our purposes today, focusing on test preparation, the boomerang is the structural model we really want to operationalize. It mimics the test conditions best. The test doesn't give you a lesson first.
No, it demands performance. Okay, let's put a pin in the boomerang for a moment. We have our teaching structure from Harmer. Now we need to look at the other side of the coin, assessment. We are turning to Brown and Abby Wickrama's principles. We are moving from how we teach to how we judge success.
A critical shift.
Brown outlines 5 cardinal criteria for testing a test. Essentially, how to know if your test is any good.
And these principles are not just for writing big standardized exams like the TOEFL or the IELTS itself. They apply to every quiz, every mock test, and arguably every classroom activity we run. If you are judging student performance in any way, you are testing, and your test should meet these criteria. The first principle is practicality.
Practicality seems straightforward. Is it feasible? Can we actually do this?
That's the core of it. It refers to the logistical constraints, the financial limitations, the time constraints, the ease of scoring, the ease of administration. You might design the absolute perfect test that measures a student's ability to debate philosophy and English with incredible nuance and depth.
The perfect test.
But if it requires 3 hours of one-on-one time with a highly paid PhD-level examiner for every single student, it is impractical. It fails the practicality test. It cannot be scaled. It's useless in a real-world program.
So there is a tension there. A multiple-choice test is highly practical. It's easy to grade. It's cheap to administer. You can feed it into a Scantron machine. But it might not be a very good measure of, say, speaking ability.
Exactly. That is the fundamental tension in assessment design. We often sacrifice other, more important values on the altar of practicality. Brown warns against this. If a test takes 5 hours to complete, it's impractical, for the student fatigue will destroy the results. If it takes 20 minutes to grade one essay, it's impractical for a busy teacher with 30 students. We have to find that sweet spot, that balance where the test is doable within the resources we actually have.
The second principle is reliability. This is all about consistency.
Reliability asks the question, is this test dependable? I always use the ruler analogy. If I measure a table today and my ruler says it's 2 meters long, and then I measure it tomorrow and the same ruler says it's 3 meters long, my ruler is broken, it is unreliable, I can't trust the data it gives me.
So test is a measuring instrument.
It is. In testing, we look at a few kinds of reliability. There's student reliability. If the same student takes this test twice, assuming no new learning has happened in between, will they get a similar score, or was their first score just a fluke, a lucky guess?
But more importantly for us at IELTS Focus, especially with writing and speaking, there is writer reliability.
This is the massive pitfall. This is where assessment systems live or die, in a writer reliability. If teacher A grades an essay and teacher B grades the exact same essay, do they give the same score? If teacher A gives it a band 7.0 and teacher B gives it a 5.5, our assessment system is broken. It's unreliable.
The student's future depends on which teacher happened to pick up their paper.
which is unacceptable. And then you have intra-rater reliability, which is almost scarier. If I grade an essay today when I'm fresh and I've had my coffee, and then I grade the very same essay next week when I'm tired, hungry, or just in a bad mood, do I give it the same score?
Oh, you?
If my mood swings can change a student's grade, then the test is unreliable. The score reflects my state of mind, not their ability.
Brown has that great anecdote about reliability failing due to administration conditions. The audio tape story from the University of Michigan.
Yes, the University of Michigan placement test scenario. It's a classic horror story in the linguistics world, a real cautionary tale. A proctor was administering a listening test to a huge room full of students. He starts the old reel-to-reel audio tape, and about 10 items in, the students start looking completely bewildered. They're flipping pages, looking around at each other.
Utter confusion.
The proctor eventually realizes the audio tape is playing questions for a completely different test booklet than the one the students have in front of them. The questions do not match the multiple-choice answers at all.
A complete administrative nightmare, the worst-case scenario.
But here's the real failure of reliability. The proctor didn't know what to do. He didn't want to admit the mistake. He didn't want to disrupt the schedule of the entire university, so he just let it play.
He did nothing.
He let the tape run to the end. The students were just guessing blindly, filling in bubbles at random for an hour. The resulting scores were collected, generated, and analyzed by the administration. Those scores were absolute garbage. They were not a reliable measure of the students' listening ability. They were a measure of the students' confusion and random luck. That is a catastrophic failure of administration reliability. If the conditions of the test aren't consistent and fair, the score is meaningless.
Moving on to the third principle, which is maybe the most important one, validity. Brown calls this the final arbiter.
It is the big question validity asks. Does the test measure what it claims to measure? This is the heart of it. If I claim I am testing your conversational ability, but I give you a multiple-choice grammar quiz on a piece of paper, that test has extremely low validity.
Even if it's perfectly reliable.
Even if it's perfectly reliable and super practical. It's not valid because the skill of selecting A, B, C, or D is not the same skill as holding a spontaneous conversation. It's measuring something else. Test-taking skills, perhaps, or grammar knowledge, but not what it claims to be measuring.
Brown breaks this down into content validity and construct validity.
Content validity is a simpler one. It basically asks, does the test sample the subject matter adequately? If you are testing a whole unit of study that covered 5 chapters of a book, but your test only asks questions about the first chapter, it lacks content validity. It doesn't represent the whole domain of knowledge you're supposed to be testing.
Makes sense. Don't just test the easy stuff.
Right. Construct validity is deeper. It's more abstract. It asks if the test taps into the theoretical concept or the construct that you're trying to measure. For example, language proficiency is a construct. It's not a single thing you can point to. It's a complex combination of skills. Self-esteem is a construct. Communicative competence is a construct.
And he gives some really pragmatic examples here regarding construct validity, right? Things like recognizing formulaic expressions.
Right, and this is where it gets so interesting for us as language teachers. A valid test of communicative competence has to go beyond pure grammar. If I ask you, do you have the time? And you answer yes, and then you just stare at me, grammatically you are correct. You do possess the time.
But pragmatically, you have failed the social test completely.
You failed. You've misunderstood the construct of social interaction. The construct of communicative competence includes knowing that do you have the time? Is a request to be told the time, not a yes-no question about possession, or understanding the implicature of is the Pope Catholic, which just means yes, obviously. A valid test needs to measure these nuances, these functional uses of language, not just whether you can conjugate a verb in a vacuum.
Now we get to the fourth principle. And for the purpose of our training today, this is a real heavyweight. Authenticity.
Authenticity. This is the degree to which the test task corresponds to real-world tasks. This is where standardized testing often struggles and where our own classroom testing fails most often. Brown notes that many tests are contrived or completely artificial.
Isolated grammar drills.
Isolated grammar drills are the least authentic thing in the world. No one in the real world walks up to you on the street and says, "Excuse me, could you please convert this sentence to the passive voice for me?" That is a classroom-only behavior. It's not a real communication task.
So the goal is natural language, the kind of thing people actually say and write.
Natural language, contextualized items, meaningful topics. The key quote to remember is that when we make a claim for authenticity, we are saying, this task is likely to be enacted in the real world. For our students, writing an academic essay is an authentic task. They will actually have to do that at university.
Listening to a professor's lecture and taking notes is an authentic task.
Absolutely. Filling in the blanks in a paragraph where every seventh word has been deleted, a cloze test, is far less authentic. It's a testing trick. It can be useful, but it's not a real-world skill.
And finally, the fifth principle.
Yeah.
Washback. This one feels like it bridges that gap between testing and teaching most directly.
It does. Washback refers to the effect of testing on teaching and learning. It's simple. Tests drive behavior. If you know you have a big test coming up, you study for it. That influence the test has on your learning habits is washback.
But it could be positive or negative, right?
Correct. Negative washback is what we commonly call teaching to the test, in a way that narrows the curriculum down to nothing. If the final exam is only multiple-choice grammar, the teacher will inevitably stop teaching speaking and writing and just drill grammar questions for months. The test has corrupted the learning process. That is negative washback.
And it produces students who can pass the test but can't speak English.
Precisely. Positive washback happens when the test actually provides feedback that helps the learner grow. The question to ask is, does the test encourage the student to see the assessment as a learning experience? Does it diagnose their weaknesses in a way that shows them how to fix them?
It's all about the feedback loop.
Exactly. If a student gets a score back that just says 6.0 with no comments, that has very low washback. It gives them a number, but no path forward. If they get a detailed breakdown of why they got a 6.0, your vocabulary was good, but your paragraph structure lacked coherence, specifically here in paragraph 2 and here in paragraph 3, and then instructions on what they need to do to get a 7.0, that is high positive washback. The test becomes a teaching tool.
Yeah, so to recap the principles really quickly, we have practicality, is it doable? Reliability, is it consistent? Validity, does it measure the right thing? Authenticity, is it real? And washback, does it help learning?
Those are our lenses. That's the framework. Now, we have to look at how we synthesize this with Harmer's boomerang models specifically for IELTS Focus. We need to put these theories to work on Monday morning.
And this brings us to section 3, the application, the directive. We have identified a challenge at our center. Typical test prep can feel very artificial, which means low authenticity, and it often focuses way too much on drilling, which is that straight arrows approach we talked about. We want to implement what we're calling the boomerang mock test.
This is the core takeaway for every instructor listening to this. We want to move away from the model of, here are 10 tips for writing task 2, now go write one. That is straight arrows. It is low engagement, and it wrongly assumes the students can't do the task yet. We want to flip it completely using the boomerang structure.
Okay, so let's walk through the boomerang mock test step by step for a writing class. Step 1, engage.
You set the context. You don't just say, open your books to page 50. You set the stage of the real IELTS exam scenario. You evoke the high stakes, the real-world pressure. You say, imagine you are in the exam room right now. The clock is ticking. You need this score for your visa to Canada. You have exactly 40 minutes starting now. You get the adrenaline pumping a little. You get their hearts and minds involved. You make the mock test feel like the real battle.
Okay, so they're engaged. They're feeling the pressure. Now step 2, activate. This is the diagnostic test part.
This is the critical flip. Instead of teaching them how to write the essay first, you make them write it. Immediately. A full-timed, simulated, authentic task. A full writing task too. No help, no dictionary, no asking their neighbor for a good synonym, just them, the prompt, and the clock.
And how does this connect directly back to Brown's principles?
It immediately maximizes authenticity. By removing all the scaffolding, by removing the teacher's help beforehand, you are mirroring the target language task almost perfectly. The student is performing exactly what they will have to perform in the real-world exam. It is performance-based assessment in its purest form, and it tests their actual independent ability, not just their ability to remember a tip you gave them 5 minutes ago.
Okay, so they do the task, they struggle, they sweat a little, they realize they don't know how to transition between their paragraphs, or they can't think of any examples. Now we move to step 3, study.
And this is the feedback loop. This connects directly to creating positive washback. The teacher has observed the performance in step 2. You've walked around the room, you've looked over their shoulders at their papers, you've seen the common problems. The teacher analyzes the gaps. Maybe the entire class failed to write a clear thesis statement. Maybe the whole class misunderstood the prompt.
So you're looking for patterns.
You're looking for patterns of error. Now, the teacher enters the study phase. But the instruction is no longer some abstract theory. It is directly, immediately relevant to the failure the students just experienced.
So you aren't teaching how to write a thesis statement because it's the next chapter in the textbook. You are teaching it because you literally just saw 20 students fail to write one 10 minutes ago.
Exactly. You stand up and say, okay, I noticed that almost none of you clearly stated your position in the introduction. Let's look at the tool to fix that. Here is how we write a strong thesis statement. The instruction is now a lifeline. It maximizes positive washback because the test, that first activation, is directly driving the learning that's happening in the study phase. The students absorb the information so much faster because they have an immediate context for it.
That is so powerful because the student is primed to receive that information. They know they need it. And then finally, step 4, activate again, the retest.
Students attempt the task again, or a very similar task. They apply the specific skills they just studied. You say, okay, now that you know how to write a clear thesis statement, I want you to rewrite just the introduction to that essay. You have 5 minutes. This validates the learning. It ensures that the study phase wasn't just them passively nodding their heads at a whiteboard. It proves they can actually apply the skill under pressure. It closes the loop.
So just to sum up the benefits of this model, using the boomerang prevents the class from being a boring lecture, which we know is low engagement. It ensures high authenticity because they are doing the real thing from the start. And it guarantees high washback because their learning is a direct result of their attempt.
And it respects the profile of the learner we are dealing with. Let's be honest, these students want to gain knowledge quickly. They are often impatient. They learn by doing, not just by listening. The boomerang sequence honors that psychology. It says, show me what you can do, I will help you fix the biggest problem, and then you will show me again. It is a cycle of continuous improvement rather than a slow, linear march through a textbook.
This is a significant shift from how many of our instructors are currently operating, though. It requires more confidence from the teacher, doesn't it? It requires the teacher to be able to diagnose errors on the fly during that first activate stage. You can't just rely on the answer key in the back of the book.
It does. It is less safe than a street arrow lesson where you have your PowerPoint slides all prepped and you just read them in order. In a boomerang lesson, you have to watch the students, you have to identify the pattern of error, and then you have to teach to that error. You might have to improvise. You might have to jump to a different chapter of the grammar book than you planned.
But you'd argue that's what makes a good teacher.
That is what professionalizes the delivery. That is what makes the difference between a generic English teacher and a true IELTS specialist. It's the ability to respond to student needs in real time.
Okay, I want to end with a final provocation for the listeners, something for you to really chew on regarding Brown's principles. There is this constant nagging tension in our work between practicality and authenticity.
There is. It's the daily battle. In a busy center like IELTS Focus, it is always easier. It is always more practical to use multiple choice grammar tests or vocabulary quizzes. You can run them through a machine. You don't have to read messy handwriting. You don't have to listen to bad audio recordings of their speaking. You can grade 100 students in an hour.
It's efficient.
It's highly practical. But the question we have to ask ourselves is this. If we sacrifice authenticity for practicality, are we actually teaching students to pass the test, or are we just teaching them the language in an abstract way?
Because if we give them inauthentic tasks, just because they are easy for us to grade, we might be giving them a false sense of security. They might get 95% on our internal grammar quizzes, but still get a 5.5 on the actual IELTS writing exam, because the exam is, by design, trying to be authentic.
Precisely. The IELTS exam doesn't ask you to choose A, B, C, or D. It asks you to produce language. If our internal testing doesn't mirror the authenticity of the external exam, we are failing our students. We are prioritizing our own convenience over their success. We are teaching them to be good at filling in bubbles, not good at communicating in English under pressure.
So here's the call to action for everyone listening. Review your lesson plans for this coming week. Look at the sequence of your activities. Be honest with yourself.
If you see only straight arrows, if you see lesson after lesson of explain, then practice, you must disrupt that pattern. Just try one boomerang. Throw the students into a task first. See what happens. It will be messy. It might feel chaotic, but it will be authentic.
And that is where the real learning happens, in the mess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where the growth is.
That wraps up this training module. Apply the boomerang. Increase authenticity. Drive positive washback. Get to work.
All right, let's get straight to the heart of the matter.
Let's do it.
If you are teaching English, or really any language, you know that there is this this massive and often really painful divide between the inputs and the outputs.
Oh, absolutely.
We can all teach reading, we can teach listening. I mean, those are receptive skills. The information comes in and we just check if it landed.
Right.
But the productive skills, speaking and writing, that's a whole different ballgame. This is where the rubber meets the road.
It really is. It's one thing for a student to, circle the correct preposition on a multiple choice sheet. It's an entirely different beast to stand in front of a stranger and express a complex idea.
Or to stare at a blank sheet of paper and write an essay that actually holds water.
It's the difference between recognizing a tool and actually building a house with it. And that creates this unique tension for us as educators and assessors, especially here at IELTS Focus.
You feel like you're constantly walking a tightrope.
100%. On one side, we have the pedagogical challenge. How do we actually elicit this language? How do we get a student to overcome that paralyzing fear of the blank page or the awkward silence in the room?
That's the teaching side.
That's the teaching side. But then, immediately, we face the assessment challenge. Once they have produced something, how on earth do we judge it fairly? How do you grade a conversation without just relying on your quote-unquote gut feeling?
And that is the mission for this deep dive. We are going to bridge that specific gap, the one between eliciting language and judging it.
Yes.
We're stepping fully into our roles as experts to dissect this entire process, because if we get this wrong, we aren't just failing a test, we're failing the learner.
That's a powerful way to put it.
To do that, we have two heavyweight sources on the table today. We've got Jeremy Harmer's How to Teach English, which is going to be our operational manual for the classroom mechanics, the how-to of getting students to actually speak and write.
And then, providing the rigorous framework for judgment, we have Language Assessment Principles in Classroom Practices by Brown and A.B. Wickrama.
And you really need both, don't you?
You absolutely need both. You cannot separate them. If you only focus on Harmer, you might have a fun, communicative classroom, lots of noise, lots of energy, but no way to measure progress objectively. You're just, chatting.
Right. And if you only focus on Brown,
you might have a statistically valid test, but students who are too terrified to open their mouths because they're just paralyzed by the fear of judgment.
And that leads to the hook for anyone listening, which is what we call the subjectivity trap.
Ah, the trap. We all think we know what good writing looks like. We feel it. But if you and I both grade the same IELTS essay right now without a rubric, the chances of us giving the exact same score are, well, they're shockingly low.
Which is terrifying for the student, right? It feels like a lottery. Their score depends on who reads their paper.
It completely undermines the whole system.
So let's unpack the teaching side first. Let's start with Harmer. He makes a really critical distinction right out of the gate between what he calls study and activation. This isn't just terminology. It fundamentally changes how you structure a lesson.
Right. This is so fundamental. In a traditional classroom, you spend a lot of time in study mode. That's your controlled practice.
Drills. Repeat after me.
Exactly. Fill in the blank. The focus there is on the construction of the language, getting the syntax perfect, the grammar right. It's necessary. It's like practicing scales on a piano.
But the problem is?
The problem is that Harmer argues many teachers stop there. They think if a student can fill in the blank, they can speak. And they can't. You have to move to activation.
Okay, so what is activation?
Activation is where you encourage students to use any and all language at their command to achieve a communicative goal. It's messy, it's not perfect, but it's real.
And this leads to that concept of speaking a skill. I love this distinction because it completely reframes the objective of a speaking class.
It does. It moves away from speaking as an oral grammar test.
Which is how so many students see it.
And teachers. The idea is that speaking is about the skill of communication itself.
So, task completion over grammatical perfection.
Precisely. Think about it in a real-world context. If you're asking for directions to a train station in London, the goal isn't to use the perfect present perfect continuous tense. The goal is to get to the train station.
Did you find your platform on time? Yes or no?
That is task completion. Harmer emphasizes that when we're teaching speaking or writing as skills, the primary objective is effectiveness. Did the listener understand? Did the reader get the point? It's a huge shift from writing to fix grammar to writing to communicate ideas.
But for that to happen, the teacher has to change their behavior, doesn't it? I think a lot of us, especially when we start out, we default to being the controller.
Oh, absolutely.
Standing at the front, directing every syllable, correcting every single mistake instantly.
Because we feel that if we don't correct it, we aren't teaching.
Exactly. It's our job to correct.
The controller role is very safe for a teacher. It seeds the ego, you are the fount of all knowledge, but it stifles production. If you control every utterance, the student never takes ownership of the language.
They're just puppets.
They are. So Harmer suggests we need to pivot to two other roles, the prompter and the assessor.
Okay, let's drill down into the prompter. This is a subtle role. It's not as obvious as the controller.
It's very subtle. This is the scenario where a student is in the middle of a sentence. Maybe they're trying to tell a story about their weekend, and they hit a wall.
We've all seen it. The silence stretches out. It gets awkward.
It gets so awkward, the controller wants to jump in and say the sentence for them, just to save the moment to end the pain.
Right, and in doing that, the controller takes ownership of the speech away from the student. They say, oh, you mean you went to the cinema? The student just says, yes, and.
And learns absolutely nothing. The prompter, however, creates what you might call a nudge. It's a discrete suggestion.
What does that look like in practice?
It could be anything. You might mouth a word silently. You might offer the first sound of a word. You might just make a gesture or an encouraging noise like mm-mm.
The goal is to help them navigate the obstacle without taking the steering wheel.
That's a great way to put it. You want to prevent the frustration that makes them shut down. Because if that silence goes on too long, they will just give up. But you absolutely must maintain the student's ownership of the speech. If you finish the sentence for them, you've robbed them of that crucial retrieval practice.
It's like spotting someone at the gym. You don't lift the weight for them.
Yeah.
You just put your hands under the bar so it doesn't crush them.
That's a perfect analogy. It's
Yeah.
about ensuring safety, not doing the work. You are there to facilitate the flow, not to be the source of the flow.
Okay, so that's the prompter. Now, what about the assessor role? Because this sounds like it could be the bad guy role, the person with the red pen.
It can be, if it's done poorly. But Harmer defines the assessor not just as the person giving the grade, but as the person offering feedback on performance.
And there's a key nuance here.
There is, and I think it's vital for our IELTS focus approach. It's sensitivity. Harmer is very, very clear. Praise is vital. We need to say, fantastic, well done, good job. But, and this is a big but, it must be merited.
Oh, I see. If you just scream, amazing, every time a student manages to say hello, the word amazing loses all value. It just becomes white noise.
Exactly. It becomes devalued currency.
Yes.
If everything is fantastic, then nothing is. The student stops trusting your feedback.
They know when they've struggled.
They know. And if they struggle through a sentence and you tell them it was perfect, they lose respect for your judgment. They start to think, this teacher doesn't actually know English very well.
So as an assessor, it's a balance between support and honesty.
It's all about balance. You need to correct, but you need to do it in a way that doesn't crush the spirit of the attempt. The key is you're correcting the language, not the person.
So let's look at how we actually get them to produce this language in the first place. Harma gives some really specific activities that help break the ice. For writing, I was struck by the concept of instant writing.
It seems so simple, but it's so powerful.
I can see why it's necessary.
It's a mechanism to break the feel of the blank page. We've all been there. You have a massive essay due, and you just stare at the white screen, paralyzed.
You write a sentence, delete it, write another, delete it.
Instant writing is about building the writing habit.
Yeah.
The teacher gives a prompt, something simple like, my favorite relative is, or I will never forget the time, and the students just have to write immediately.
No planning, no agonizing over the perfect first sentence.
None, just go. It bypasses that internal editor that cripples so many people.
It forces flow.
It does. It teaches the brain that writing is just talking on paper. Another great one Harmer mentions is using music and pictures.
Oh, I love this one.
You play a piece of music, maybe something dramatic or melancholy, and ask the students to write a film scene that accompanies it.
That's brilliant because it taps into creativity and emotion.
Which often unlocks language that a dry grammar prompt never, ever would. It takes the pressure off the English part and puts the focus on the story part. The language becomes the vehicle, not the destination.
Right. Okay, so now for speaking. Harmer talks about the information gap. This feels like a staple of the communicative classroom, but I feel like people often misuse it.
It is a must-have. But you're right, it's often done lazily. The reason it works so well is that it mimics real life.
How so?
In a true information gap activity, student A has information that student B does not have, and vice versa. Maybe student A has a picture of a room with a cat on the sofa, and student B has the same room, but the cat is under the table. They must talk to find the differences.
Right. They can't just sit there in silence. The task itself demands communication.
Exactly. Now, compare that to a traditional drill where a student asks, "Where is the cat?" And they both know the answer because they are looking at the same page in the textbook.
It's fake. It's performative.
It's completely performative. In an information gap, the question, "Where is the cat?" is a genuine inquiry. It creates a communicative necessity. This forces the brain to process language as a tool for solving a problem, which is exactly what we want for IELTS preparation.
So if there is no gap.
There is no need to speak.
Okay, so we've used our prompter skills, we've set up these amazing information gaps, and the students are producing language, they are talking, they are writing.
The classroom is alive.
It's alive, but now comes the hard part. We have to judge it. And this brings us to our second section, and the principles of assessment from Brown and Abebukrama. I feel like we have to shift gears here because Brown takes a much more scientific, almost clinical approach.
And we have to. This is where we put on our scientist hats. Brown breaks assessment down into a continuum. On one end, you have informal assessment.
Which connects right back to Harmer's prompter role.
Directly. This is the constant subconscious coaching we do all the time. It's the marginal comment on a draft, the nice job you say in the hallway, the quick pronunciation tip you give someone.
And Brown makes this distinction. He calls it formative rather than summative, right?
Yes. Formative assessment shapes the learning. It's like checking the oil while the car is running. You top it up, you fix a loose belt so the car keeps going. Summative assessment is the final judgment. The grade at the end of the semester, the final exam score.
The journey versus the destination.
Brown uses a tennis analogy that I find really helpful. Informal assessment is the coaching you get during a practice scrimmage. The coach stops play, says tweak your grip, and you keep playing.
And formal assessment.
That's the tournament game. The results are recorded, they become final. No do-overs.
And the problem arises when we treat the scrimmage like the tournament, or vice versa. If you grade every single sentence a student says in class, they just freeze up.
But if you never grade them formally, they panic when the exam comes. But even in the tournament, in the formal assessment, we run into what Brown calls the reliability problem.
Reliability. This is the cornerstone of all good testing.
It is everything. In testing terms, this simply means consistency. If you step on a scale and it says 150 pounds and you step off and step back on a second later and it says 160 pounds, that scale is unreliable. You throw it out.
Right.
In language testing, we have the subjectivity trap. A math test is highly reliable. The answer to 2 plus 2 is always 4. It doesn't matter if the teacher is tired or hungry or grumpy.
But grading a speech.
That is massively prone to rater reliability issues.
And Brown breaks this down into inter-rater and intra-rater. Let's clarify those because they sound similar. But the distinction really matters for how we run our departments.
Okay, so inter-rater reliability is consistency between two different people. If you and I both grade the same IELTS speaking test, do we give the same score?
And if you give a 5 and I give a 7?
We have an inter-rater reliability problem. It means the score depends on who you get, not how good you are. That is fundamentally unfair.
Okay, and inter-rater?
That is consistency within the same person. This is what I call the Friday afternoon effect. Do I give the same score to a paper I read on Monday morning when I'm fresh and I've had my coffee as I do to the same quality paper on Friday at 4 p.m. when I just want to go home?
That is a very real struggle. I think every teacher has felt that guilt of wondering, was I too harsh on that last batch of essays because I was just annoyed?
It's human nature. We get rhetoric fatigue, we get bored, or we get halo effects, where a student has really neat handwriting, so we subconsciously assume their grammar must be good too.
Right.
And Brown also points out something called test administration reliability. These are external factors. He gives this great example of street noise. Imagine a listening or speaking test where there's a jackhammer outside the window for one group of students.
But it's dead silent for the next group.
Exactly. The test conditions themselves have become unreliable. The score now reflects the noise level, not the student's actual ability.
So how do we fight this? We can't always control the jackhammers, but we can control how we score. And this leads us to the big debate between holistic and analytic scoring. This feels like the eternal battle in English departments.
It is the classic choosing your weapons scenario. Let's start with holistic scoring. This is the big picture approach.
A gut feeling.
It's a very educated gut feeling, but yes, you read the essay or listen to the speech, and you assign a single global score. You say, overall, that feels like a 4 out of 6.
It's based on an overall impression of vibe check.
Essentially, yes. The rater matches the performance to a general descriptor in a rubric. Now, the pros are obvious. It is fast. If you have to grade 5,000 entrance exams for a university, holistic scoring is very efficient.
And surprisingly reliable.
Surprisingly, yes, if you train the raters really well, you can actually get high inter-rater reliability because everyone is trained to agree on what a generic 4 looks like.
But there's a catch.
A massive catch. It masks differences. It completely hides the details.
What do you mean?
You could have student A who has brilliant, complex ideas. Let's say they're discussing geopolitical economics in their essay, but they have terrible grammar. And then you have student B who has perfect grammar but writes simple, boring sentences with no substance at all.
In a holistic system, they might both get a 3.
They very well might. But they have completely different problems that need fixing.
And this means the score gives them no useful feedback. It doesn't tell them how to improve.
Exactly. There is no washback. Washback is such a key term in Brown's work. It's the effect the test has on teaching and learning. A holistic score tells the student nothing about their specific strengths or weaknesses. They just see a number.
It's a dead end.
It is. And that is why for our context at IELTS-FOCUS, where our primary goal is teaching and improvement, we lean so heavily toward analytic scoring.
Analytic scoring is the classroom hero.
It really is.
This is where we break it all down. We aren't just looking at the house. We are inspecting the plumbing, the wiring, and the foundation separately.
Harmer gives a simple example of a 0 to 5 scale for specific traits: grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, coherence, fluency. But Brown cites the Jacobs et al. Profile, which I think is even more powerful because it introduces weighting.
Okay, explain the weighting.
In the Jacobs profile, content is weighted at 30 points, organization at 20, vocabulary at 20, syntax at 25, and then mechanics, things like spelling and punctuation at only 5.
I want to pause on that weighting because it's so important. But first, let's just state the obvious pro here. The feedback is incredible. The student looks at their score and sees, oh, my content is a 28 out of 30, but my syntax is only a 10 out of 25. I have great ideas, but I can't build a sentence properly.
That is positive washback. That is a test driving the learning process. It gives them a clear roadmap for improvement.
The con, of course,
is time. It takes much, much longer to mark. You have to make 5 or 6 distinct judgments for every single student. You have to read the essay multiple times or listen very, very carefully. But if we are serious about improvement, that time investment is non-negotiable.
So if we decide analytic is the way to go, we can't just make it up as we go along. We need to build a rubric. A good rubric is essentially the bridge between the subjective teacher and the objective score.
It's our contract with the student.
Right. Brown defines it as a guide that lists criteria for different levels of performance. But you can't just slap one together. There is a science to constructing a valid rubric.
There is. Step 1 is defining the constructs.
What does that mean, constructs?
It's just a fancy word for what are we actually measuring? This is where validity comes in. Are we measuring fluency? Are we measuring task achievement? Is it grammatical accuracy?
So if you are grading a creative writing assignment, but your rubric only focuses on spelling and punctuation,
your rubric is invalid. You aren't measuring what you claim to be teaching. You're measuring copy editing skills, not creative writing skills.
And this connects to step 2, determining weighting. This is where Brown's insight on the inequality of errors comes in. This honestly changed how I view grading.
It is a fascinating concept. Brown argues that not all errors are created equal. In that Jacobs profile I mentioned, content is worth 30 points. But mechanics, spelling, and punctuation is only 5.
And that's a deliberate pedagogical choice.
A very deliberate one. It prevents the tragedy of the brilliant but messy student from failing. If a student writes a profound, moving essay about their childhood but misspells 10 words, a badly weighted rubric might fail them. A well-weighted rubric acknowledges the content is excellent, maybe 30 out of 30, while noting the mechanics need work, so maybe 2 out of 5.
That feels so much fairer. It reflects the reality of communication. If I send you an email with a typo but a brilliant business idea, you're still interested in the idea.
Of course. But if you send me a perfectly spelled email that makes no sense, I'm just going to delete it. We value meaning over mechanics in real life, so our rubric should reflect that.
And then step 3 is creating descriptors. This is where so many teachers go wrong.
They get vague. They get lazy. They say a level 5 is excellent and a level 4 is good. But what does good actually mean?
Good creates the subjectivity trap all over again. Good to me might be Shakespeare. Good to you might be a coherent tweet.
It does. It's useless. You need behavioral descriptions. Instead of good fluency, you need to say something like, can maintain conversation despite minor pauses.
And instead of bad fluency,
You'd say, long pauses cause strain for the listener. Those are observable behaviors. You can point to them in a student's performance and say, you did this.
That makes the feedback defensible, too. If a student complains about their grade, which they will.
They always will.
You can point to the rubric and say, well, look, the rubric requires a range of complex sentence structures for a band 7, and you primarily used simple sentences. It removes the personal element. It's not, I didn't like your essay. It's, your essay didn't meet the specific agreed-upon criteria.
It creates that contract between the learner and the teacher. But even with a great rubric, you still need a reliability check.
What does that involve?
Well, Harmer suggests involving a second marker whenever possible. It's called moderation. If two of us use the exact same rubric on the same essay and get wildly different scores, then the rubric is flawed, or we need more training on how to use it.
And Brown has a tip for the intra-rater discipline, that Friday afternoon fatigue we talked about.
This is a great practical tip. He suggests reading through a set of essays without grading them first. Just scan them to get a sense of the range. What's the best essay in this pile? What's the worst?
So you're calibrating your internal scale.
You're setting a baseline in your head. Then you go back and grade them. It prevents that common problem where you grade the first essay you read too harshly because you haven't seen the others yet, or maybe too easily because you're in a good mood. It calibrates you before you start weighing the evidence.
That is such practical advice. It adds a bit of time up front, but it saves so much integrity in the end.
Absolutely.
So we've covered the teaching, the prompting, the activating. We've covered the assessment, the analytic scoring, the rubrics. I want to end on the ultimate trade-off in language teaching. The great battle between accuracy and fluency.
The eternal pendulum swing.
It feels like the pendulum swings back and forth every decade in English language teaching.
It does, and both Harmer and Brown offer a really balanced way to handle this. Harmer's advice is situational. He says during study phases, when you are doing drills, controlled practice accuracy is king. You correct immediately because the goal is precision. You are building the muscle memory.
But during activation?
During activation, when they are doing that role play or the information gap, fluency is king. You must not interrupt the flow to correct grammar.
That's a hard rule.
It has to be. If you stop a student in the middle of a passionate argument to correct a preposition, you have killed the communication. You have turned a communicative act back into a grammar drill. You've signaled to the student that how they speak is more important than what they're trying to say.
So what do we do? Just let them make mistakes. That feels negligent.
No, not at all. Harmer suggests gentle correction, or what's often called delayed feedback. You watch, you listen, you take notes quietly. You let the activity finish completely.
And
then, afterwards, you put some common errors you heard on the board and discuss them as a class. You say, I heard someone say this. How can we fix it? You address the accuracy without destroying the fluency of the moment. You separate the what of the message from the how of its delivery.
And Brown backs this up from a validity standpoint.
He does. He says you have to ensure the assessment matches the task. If you ask for a creative story, a fluency and content task, don't grade it solely on spelling. That's a question of validity. Are you measuring what you asked for?
If you want to test spelling, give a spelling test.
Exactly. If you want to test speaking, test communication.
This really brings us to the final takeaway for our listeners. For anyone at IELTS Focus, to be a true expert here, you have to evolve. You have to move from being just a corrector of errors to being an assessor of communication.
That is the goal. We want to produce learners who are confident enough to speak. That's fluency. And skilled enough to be understood. That's accuracy. It's a delicate balance. We are nurturing a skill, not just checking boxes on a test.
And here's a provocative thought to leave you with. We talk a lot about positive washback designing tests that encourage good learning habits, but consider the inverse. If we over-penalize accuracy in the early stages, if we crush every small mistake with a red pen because we think that's being rigorous, do we effectively destroy the student's willingness to ever take the risks necessary to achieve fluency?
That is the danger. If the cost of making a mistake is too high, the student will just play it safe. They'll only use simple sentences they know are correct. They will avoid complex vocabulary, and you cannot learn a language by playing it safe.
You have to be willing to make mistakes.
You have to be willing to sound foolish to eventually sound fluent. Our job, through smart rubrics and sensitive prompting, is to create a space where that risk is rewarded, not punished.
That is it for this deep dive into productive skills. We hope this helps you bridge that gap in your own classrooms.
Keep eliciting, keep assessing, and keep the communication flowing.
See you next time.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're not just talking about tips and tricks to learn a language today.
Oh, not at all.
We're moving way beyond the usual advice, watch movies with subtitles or use flashcards. We are going deep into the engine room. We're looking at the actual academic methodology behind how we teach and, I think more importantly, how we test what are called receptive skills.
Listening and reading.
Listening and reading.
And it is a massive topic. And honestly, it's where most language learners and, frankly, a lot of teachers get stuck.
Right.
We often see language learning through the lens of the student. How do I memorize this list? But today we are flipping the script.
Yeah.
We're looking at it from the perspective of, like, the instructional designer and the psychometrician. We want to understand the architecture of comprehension.
Exactly. We're looking at the blueprints. And to do that, we are drawing heavily from two absolute titans in the field. We have language assessment, principles and classroom practices by Brown and Abuakrama, which it essentially gives us the anatomy of testing.
Yeah, the real nitty-gritty.
And then we have Jeremy Harmer's How to Teach English, which focuses more on the classroom strategy and the materials themselves.
And these texts are just foundational. Brown gives us the theory of what's happening in the brain.
Yeah.
And then Harmer gives us the practical application of how to actually handle that in a room full of students.
The mission here is really to answer the so what question for you, the listener. If you're a teacher or even a really serious independent learner, how do you construct a lesson or a test that actually measures communication?
Right.
Because I think we've all had that experience where we ace a multiple choice test, we get the A+ meet, but then we step off a plane in a foreign country and realize we can't even order a coffee.
That is the exact gap we are trying to bridge today. It is the gap between linguistic competence, which is knowing about the language, knowing the rules, the theory, and performance ability, which is actually using it in real time.
Right.
It's the difference between knowing how an internal combustion engine works and actually being able to drive a car in rush hour traffic.
I love that analogy.
You can know everything about the engine and still crash the car.
You can still crash the car. Okay, so let's start with the fuel for that car, the materials. We're looking at Jeremy Harmer here.
Yeah.
He breaks down the way we handle texts, whether that's audio or written, into two big buckets: intensive and extensive. Now, to the layperson, those just sound like synonyms for working hard.
Right.
But in pedagogy, they're totally different beasts, aren't they?
Completely different, and they serve very distinct functions in the brain. Harmer is very clear on this differentiation. Let's start with intensive skills.
Okay.
Intensive listening or reading is what typically happens in a formal classroom setting. It is study-focused.
Right.
The teacher is there guiding the process. You are stopping, you are rewinding the audio, you are analyzing specific grammar points or vocabulary. You are essentially putting the language under a microscope.
So that's the work. That's the drilling, the really focused stuff.
It is. It's the calibration. You're looking for specific details. Maybe you're hunting for past tense verbs, or you're trying to understand a very specific sequence of events in a really dense paragraph. The cognitive load is high, and the focus is usually on accuracy and detail.
And then the teacher's role here is crucial.
Absolutely. They are the organizer and the guide. They are pointing out the obstacles, saying, look at this. Why is this word here?
Right. But then you have extensive skills. And this feels like the complete other side of the coin.
It is, yes. Extensive reading or listening is often done outside the classroom, or at least independently. And the goal here isn't to analyze every single word. The goal is pleasure or, general global understanding. It's reading a novel without reaching for a dictionary every 3 seconds. It's listening to a podcast just to get the gist of the story.
So if I'm reading Harry Potter in Spanish and I just skip a few adjectives, I don't know because I just want to find out if Harry catches the snitch. That's extensive reading.
That is precisely it. And Harmer points out that the teacher's role shifts dramatically here. In intensive work, the teacher is a guide through the difficulties.
Right.
In extensive work, the teacher is just a facilitator. He calls them a promoter. You're just trying to encourage the habit. You want the student to engage with the language. Just let it wash over them.
It's almost like the difference between practicing your scales on the piano, which is intensive, it's work, and just sitting down to play a song for fun, which is extensive.
That is a perfect analogy.
Because if you only ever do scales, you'll be bored to tears. But if you only ever play for fun, you might never fix your technical errors.
You need both to be a musician, and you need both to be a linguist. But this brings us to, I think, the biggest dilemma Harmer highlights, and this is something every teacher battles with, the authenticity dilemma.
Oh, absolutely. I hear this all the time. There's this pressure, right? Don't use a textbook. Burn the textbook. Use a real newspaper. Listen to real CNN news.
Yeah, the authentic materials push.
It sounds great in theory because, we want to prepare students for the real world. But Harmer throws up a big red flag here.
He does. He calls it a potential insuperable problem. And think about it. If you hand a lower-level student a strictly authentic text, something written for a competent native speaker, it is often just impenetrable.
Right.
The cognitive load is just too high. There's too much unknown vocabulary, complex sentence structures, cultural nuance.
And if a student understands nothing, they learn nothing.
Worse than that, they get demoralized. It validates their fear that they will never learn the language. It's like trying to teach someone to swim by throwing them into a hurricane. It's authentic water, sure, but it's not helpful.
So authentic doesn't always mean effective.
Not at all.
So if we can't throw them into the deep end of the New York Times on day one, what's the solution? Do we go back to the cat sat on the mat?
Yeah.
Because that's just boring and artificial.
Not necessarily. Harmer proposes a much more nuanced approach. First, for beginners, you can't use authentic material, but you have to select it very carefully. Use items where the cognitive load is manageable, things like menus, timetables, signs.
Right. A train schedule is authentic. It's a real schedule. But it doesn't require complex grammatical processing to understand. You're just pulling out data.
Exactly. You get the psychological win of using a real object without the trauma of translating 1,000 words of dense prose.
I see.
But for longer prose, stories, articles, essays, Harmer suggests we move away from this binary of authentic versus artificial and aim for something called realistic.
Realistic. Unpack that for me, because that sounds a little bit like a loophole.
It's not a loophole, it's a design strategy. The idea is we want texts that are written for the student's level, so the vocabulary is controlled, the grammar is manageable, but they are designed to sound and feel like real English.
Is this what he refers to as rough tuning?
Yes. Think of it like a radio dial. You are rough tuning the frequency to match the student's reception capabilities. It is not baby talk. It preserves the natural rhythm and intonation and flow of the language, but it removes the unnecessary static. All the obscure idioms or overly complex subclauses that would just block understanding.
So instead of a text saying, the protagonist exhibited a plethora of melancholy, which is authentic but really hard,
Right.
a realistic text might say, the main character was extremely sad. It conveys the same meaning. It's dramatically correct, but it's accessible.
Precisely.
Yep.
It's designing a simulation that feels real but is safe enough for them to learn in. And Harmer applies this to audio as well. He makes a really strong point about sourcing audio.
Right.
He basically says, stop relying on the textbook CD.
Which, frankly, often sounds like robots talking to each other. Hello? How are you? I'm fine. It's so sterile.
The dreaded textbook dialogue. Yes, Harmer encourages teachers to be creators. With modern technology, everyone has a smartphone. There's really no excuse. He suggests recording yourself, or even better, grabbing a colleague or a friend.
Just putting a phone on the table and having a chat.
Exactly. If you want your students to hear a natural conversation, record one. It allows you to control the level that rough tuning we spoke of, while keeping the hesitation, the tone, and the reality of a human voice.
And the background noise. Real life isn't a soundproof studio. If you're learning to listen, you need to learn to listen through a bit of ambient noise.
Precisely. And Harmer mentions the internet as well, obviously, copyright permitting. But the main point is exposure to different voices. If a student only ever hears their teacher or the one voice actor on the textbook CD, they aren't building a robust model of the language. They are building a model of one person's language.
Okay, so that's the how of the materials. We balance intensive and extensive, and we create these realistic materials that simulate authenticity without overwhelming the learner. Now, I want to shift gears to the what.
Okay.
This is where we bring in Brown and Abby Whitcroft.
The heavy hitters, yes.
Yeah.
This is where we get into the anatomy of the skill itself.
Right. They get really, really granular about what is actually happening in the brain when we listen or read. They argue, and I think this is just fascinating, that you cannot simply say a student is good at listening.
Yeah.
That statement is meaningless to them.
It's way too vague. It's like saying a doctor is good at medicine. Okay, but are they a neurosurgeon or a podiatrist? Comprehension isn't a monolith. Brown and Ebbe Wickrama break receptive skills down into two massive categories, micro skills and macro skills.
Let's start at the atomic level, the micro skills. This is bottom-up processing, correct?
Correct. Bottom up means you're taking the smallest units of data and building them up into meaning. You are starting with the raw signal.
So for listening, what are we talking about here? Is this just hearing?
It starts there. It starts with physically discriminating distinctive sounds. Can you tell the difference between ship and sheep?
Right.
Or bat and bet? If your brain can't distinguish that phone, the rest of the meaning just collapses. But it goes deeper. It's about recognizing reduced forms.
Reduced forms, you mean like gonna and wanna?
Yes, but even more subtle than that sometimes. In a classroom, a teacher might say, "What do you want to do?" Clearly enunciating every single word. But in the real world, that sentence sounds like, "What I want to do." A microskill is the brain's ability to recognize that what I is actually a reduction of what do you.
That is huge. I feel like that's the #1 complaint of learners. I know the words, but I just didn't hear them.
Exactly.
They didn't have the micro skill to process the reduction. They were listening for the individual bricks, but the speaker threw a whole wall at them.
Precisely. They are listening for the citation form of the word, the way it looks in the dictionary, but the speaker is using the weak form. Another listening microskill is processing performance variables.
What are those?
Real speech is messy. It has pauses, errors, and corrections. We stammer, we say,
You backtrack. We start a sentence and then change our mind halfway through.
Exactly. A competent listener has to filter those out. If you are only trained on scripted, perfect audio, real speech sounds like chaos. Your brain tries to assign meaning to and it just gets overloaded. A microskill is literally the ability to ignore the garbage data.
Okay, and what about reading? What does a micro skill look like there? Is it just knowing the alphabet?
That's the start discriminating graphemes, the letters and shapes.
Oh.
But it also involves retaining chunks of language in short-term memory. This is a big one.
Oh, interesting.
When you read a long, complex sentence, you have to remember the subject at the beginning by the time you reach the verb at the very end.
It's like buffering a video.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. You need enough RAM in your brain to hold the beginning of the thought while you process the end. If your buffer is too small, you get to the end of the sentence and have no idea who did what. That isn't a grammar problem, that's a micro-skill processing problem.
That explains so much. I've seen students read a sentence out loud perfectly, pronounce every word right, and then look up and say, I have no idea what that said.
Yes.
Their buffer was full just processing the sounds.
Exactly. They were using all their cognitive power on the microskill of just decoding letters, so they had nothing left for meaning.
Okay, so those are the micro skills.
Yeah.
The bricks. Now let's talk about the house. The macro skills.
The macro skills.
Yeah.
This is top-down processing. This is where we look at the communicative intent and the big picture. We aren't looking at the individual sounds anymore. We are looking at the ideas.
So give me an example for listening.
A key listening macro skill is recognizing communicative functions. Is this person angry? Are they making a joke? Are they asking a rhetorical question? You aren't just decoding the sounds, you are inferring the intent behind them.
Right. If someone says, great job, with a flat tone and an eye roll, the micro skills hear the words great and job. But the macro skills understand that was terrible.
Exactly. You are distinguishing between literal and implied meaning. And this often involves using nonverbal clues, body language, tone of voice, to decipher that meaning. The micro skills give you the data. The macro skills give you the story.
And in reading, what does that look like?
In reading, macro skills involve inferring context that isn't explicit. And to do that, we use our schemata, our background knowledge.
Schemata is such a cool concept. It's basically all the mental file folders we already have in our heads, right?
Yes. If I read a story about a home run, my cultural schema tells me this is baseball, even if the text doesn't explicitly explain the rules of the sport.
I see.
If I don't have that schema, if I've never heard of baseball, I might understand every single word grammatically but have zero clue what is actually happening. I'll just picture someone literally running home.
Brown lists scanning and skimming here too, right?
Yeah.
As macro skills.
These are strategic macro skills. The ability to quickly look through a text to find a specific piece of information that's scanning, like finding a price on a menu. Skimming is running your eyes over the text just to get the gist, the main idea.
So why does this distinction matter so much for a teacher? I mean, why can't I just say, read this and answer the questions?
Because if a student fails, you need to diagnose why. Did they fail because they couldn't distinguish the letters? That's a micro problem. You need to work on phonics or vocabulary.
Okay.
Or did they fail because they didn't understand the cultural reference or the sarcasm? That's a macro problem.
That is a light bulb moment. If I'm testing a student's ability to understand a menu, I shouldn't be tricking them with complex grammar. I should be testing the macro skill of scanning for price and food type.
Precisely. Brown emphasizes that you cannot simply test reading. You must identify which specific objective micro or macro you are assessing. If you don't know what you're testing, your test is invalid.
And this leads us directly into the deep waters of Part 3, testing design. Because if the anatomy of the skill is this complex, surely our tests need to be more sophisticated than just circle A, B, or C.
You would think so, but Brown and Abe Wickrama are very, very critical of how we have historically done this.
The historical problem. I feel like we're about to bash some multiple choice tests.
Well, they deserve a little bashing. Specifically, they critique methods like the traditional close test, the fill in the blanks if they are not designed well. The criticism is that these tests often only measure linguistic competence.
And we're going back to that distinction we started with.
Right. They tell us if a student knows the grammar rule for a past tense verb. They do not tell us if the student can actually perform a communicative task.
Right.
It's the difference between checking if a student has memorized the dictionary versus checking if they can write a persuasive email.
And a lot of standardized tests are so guilty of this. They test about the language because it's easy to grade. A machine can grade a bubble sheet. A machine can't easily grade a real conversation.
Exactly. Convenience often trumps authenticity. But Brown really pushes for authenticity in testing. He pulls from models of language competence that are much broader than just grammar. They include things like organizational competence. Can you structure a thought? And pragmatic competence. Do you know the social rules of the language?
And to test that, we need what he calls integrated performance.
Integrated performance is the key phrase here. Just think about your daily life. Do you ever just listen in a vacuum? Do you ever listen without responding or writing something down or acting on it?
Rarely. I mean, I listen so I can answer you. Or I listen to the announcement at the airport so I can find my gate. Or I read the recipe so I can cook the dinner.
Exactly. Listening connects to speaking. Reading connects to writing or doing. Brown argues that our assessments should mirror this. We shouldn't isolate the skills in these artificial silos. If we want to test listening, we should test what the student does with what they heard.
Okay, so let's look at some of the alternative tasks he suggests. Because a multiple choice is easy, but it's not always authentic. So what are the better options?
One strong option is responsive assessment. This mimics the short, authentic interactions we have every single day.
Like what?
Greetings, small talk, simple requests. The key here is that the prompt is spoken.
Ah, so we aren't reading a question on a piece of paper.
Right. In a traditional test, you might read question 1, what time is it? And you circle A, it is 9:0000. That's a reading test disguised as a communication test. In responsive assessment, the teacher asks, excuse me, do you have the time? And the student has to respond verbally.
Yeah, it's about 9:15.
Exactly. That tests the listening micro skill of processing the question and the speaking skill of formulating a natural response. It's integrated. It's real.
Brown also talks about retelling. I remember doing this in school, and I absolutely hated it, but I can see the value now.
Retelling is fantastic because it is such a heavy cognitive lift. The test taker listens to a news event or a story and then has to summarize it. To do this accurately, just think about what your brain has to do.
Okay, so you have to get the gist. That's a macro skill right there.
Right. You have to identify the main idea, separate the supporting points from the fluff, and filter out all the irrelevant details. And then you have to reconstruct it using your own productive skills. You can't fake a retelling. You either understood the structure of the narrative or you didn't.
It prevents that thing students do where they just catch one keyword and then guess the answer from the multiple choice options.
Yes.
In a retelling, if you only caught one word, you have nothing to say.
Exactly. It exposes the holes in comprehension instantly. And then we have the most complex category, and this is where it gets really interesting. Interactive speaking.
Okay.
Brown divides this into two types, and the distinction is fascinating for assessment. You have transactional interaction and interpersonal interaction.
Transactional sounds like business.
Yeah.
Like, I would like to buy a ticket to London.
Correct. It is exchanging specific information. Excuse me, do you have the time? What is the main problem? Deforestation. The goal is clear and informational.
And the success is easy to measure. Did the information get across? If I got the ticket to London, I passed.
Right. It's binary, it's a success or a failure. But interpersonal interaction, that's all the social stuff. That's maintaining relationships.
Right.
Small talk, casual conversation at a party, gossiping. This involves slang, humor, ellipsis, sarcasm.
And Brown calls this the assessment challenge.
It is a nightmare to test. And the reason is because interpersonal language is pragmatically complex, but often structurally very simple or vague.
Right, because there's no one right answer. If I tell a joke and you laugh, that's successful interpersonal communication.
Right.
But how do you put that on a rubric? Student made me chuckle, 5 points.
Exactly. And often interpersonal communication relies on shared knowledge or very vague language. If I say, how's it going? And you say, not bad, that conversation is grammatically incredibly simple. A beginner could say it. But socially, it's vital. Brown notes that test designers often shy away from this because it's subjective, it's hard to grade. But ignoring it means we aren't testing a huge part of what it means to be human and use language.
It's almost like we are good at testing the robot parts of language, the data exchange, but we're really bad at testing the human parts.
That is a very fair assessment. They try, of course. They use prompts that force a specific register, like talk to your boss about being late versus talk to your friend about being late. But it remains the frontier of language testing.
So this brings us back to Harmer's point about rough tuning. If we want students to succeed in these complex interpersonal tasks, like detecting sarcasm or using humor, we have to feed them materials that contain those elements, don't we?
Yes. You cannot feed a student a diet of sterile textbook English for 3 years and then expect them to handle a joke in a bar. It's just not going to happen. You have to introduce those realistic elements early on. You have to expose them to the messiness of real language.
I want to circle back to something Brown mentioned regarding dictation. Now, when I hear dictation, I think of Victorian schoolrooms. Teacher reads, students write. It feels incredibly old-fashioned.
It does.
But Brown actually defends it.
He does, but with very important caveats. For a long time, dictation was thrown out because people thought it was just spelling practice. But later research showed that dictation is actually a potent test of integrative skills.
How so?
Because to write down a sentence accurately as it is being spoken, you are doing a ton of processing. You are discriminating sounds, that's the micro level. But you are also using your grammatical knowledge to predict what word comes next. That's macro and schema. And you are holding the phrase in your short-term memory.
So if I miss a sound, my grammar brain kind of fills it in for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if your grammar is weak, you will mishear the sentence. You might write the dog walk instead of the dog walked because you didn't hear the ed sound, and your internal grammar engine didn't autocorrect it for you.
Wow.
So dictation is actually a stress test for your internal grammar engine.
That is fascinating. It turns a really old-school drill into a high-tech diagnostic tool.
But again, it has to be done right. It can't just be spellingless. It has to be meaningful chunks of language.
This really highlights that teaching English or any language isn't just about vocabulary lists and grammar rules. It's about training a student to process a chaotic stream of sounds and symbols and somehow make meaning out of it all.
And giving them the confidence to handle the performance variables, the mistakes, the pauses, the noise that happen in real life.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We started with Harmer telling us to use realistic materials, these rough-tuned texts that bridge the gap between the textbook and the real world.
Right. Moving from that intensive study where we dissect the language to extensive exposure where we just enjoy it and let it flow.
Then we looked at Brown's anatomy of the brain, realizing we need to build these specific micro skills, like recognizing reduced forms,
Great what to do.
and these macro skills like scanning for information or understanding cultural context.
And realizing that if a student fails to understand, we have to pinpoint which of those skills is broken. We can't just tell them to try harder.
And finally, we realized that to verify any of this is actually happening, we need tests that require integrated performance. We need tasks like retelling and responsive speaking, not just filling in bubbles on a sheet.
Because listening and reading don't happen in a vacuum. They are always part of a bigger communication loop.
So here's a thought I want to leave everyone with, and it's something that struck me while reading Brown's critique of standardized testing. He calls many traditional tasks artificial and contrived.
He's not wrong.
So if you are a teacher listening to this, or even a student preparing for a big exam, ask yourself this: are you grading or are you studying for the ability to fill in a bubble sheet? Or are you grading the ability to actually survive?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it?
Because if we aren't testing the ability to detect sarcasm or the ability to understand a mumbled request at a crowded train station, are we actually teaching the language?
Yeah.
Or are we just teaching a purely academic code that nobody actually speaks?
We might be teaching them to pass a test, but failing to teach them how to connect with another human being. And ultimately, connection is what language is for.
That's a powerful place to land. It means we might need to rethink our entire curriculum tomorrow morning.
Sorry about the extra workload.
Huge thanks for breaking down these dense texts with us today. This was a true deep dive.
My pleasure. It's important work.
And thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.
Welcome, teachers. Please, come in and take a seat. Close the door behind you, would you? We had a lot to cover today. Now look, I know why you're here. We aren't just talking about grading papers today. We aren't here to discuss the logistics of whether you should use a red pen or a green pen or, how to calculate a band score to 2 decimal places just to satisfy a spreadsheet. Today, we're talking about something much more fundamental. We are talking about the art of feedback and correction.
It does sound a bit high-minded, doesn't it? Almost abstract. But this is actually the trenches of our profession. This is where the real work happens day in, day out.
Exactly. And I know the reality of the IELTS classroom. I see it every single day walking past your rooms here at IELTS Focus. You have students who are desperate, physically desperate for a score.
Oh, absolutely. It's all they can think about sometimes.
They are obsessed with the destination. They just want to know, am I a 6.0 or a 6.5? Will I get into university? Will I get my visa? That is the pressure we all live under. It's summative pressure. But here is the problem. To get that score, they need growth. They need the formative process. And that, right there, that is where the tension lies.
It is a profound tension. I've heard it described as the fundamental conflict between measuring a student, weighing the pig, so to speak, and actually teaching them.
Feeding the pig.
Feeding the pig, exactly. You can weigh the pig as often as you like, but weighing it doesn't make it heavier. Only feeding it does.
Measuring versus feeding. I like that. That is going to be our mantra today because, frankly, we spend a lot of time weighing. So, to navigate this, we are going to look at the methodologies of 2 absolute giants in our field. We have Jeremy Harmer, focusing on the pedagogy of intervention, the moment-to-moment stuff, and then we have the framework of Brown and Abiwikrama, which is all about assessment principles.
The big picture.
The big picture, yeah. We are going to deconstruct how we intervene in a student's learning journey without, and this is key, without destroying their confidence.
And we really have to start with the how, the mechanics.
Yeah.
Because intervention is a physical act in the classroom. It's something you do.
Right. So let's start there. The mechanics of intervention. The moment a student makes a mistake, it happens hundreds of times a lesson. A student says he go to the store or writes a sentence with no punctuation. What do? Jeremy Harmer calls the act of correcting a delicate event. And that phrase really stuck with me reading the source material this week. Delicate?
It's a great word for it.
Because in the rush of a lesson, honestly, it often feels mechanical. You hear an error, you fix it, you treat it like a typo. But Harmer is suggesting there is a psychological weight to it.
There is an immense psychological weight, and I think we often underestimate it because we are the experts. We're comfortable in the language. For us, an error is just data. But for the learner, Harmer argues that if we are too critical, or even just critical in the wrong way, we risk demotivating the student entirely. We crush what's called the language ego.
Language ego. That's a term Brown uses too. Let's define that for the teachers in the room because it's not just about feelings, is it?
No, not at all. It's a core concept in second language acquisition. When you learn a language, you aren't just learning vocabulary and grammar. You are developing a new identity, really. A new mode of thinking and expressing yourself.
A new persona, almost.
Precisely. And it's fragile. It's like a thin shell. If a student feels that every time they open their mouth or put pen to paper, they are going to be judged and found wanting, they retreat. They stop taking risks.
And that's fatal for learning.
It's the death of progress. The data is absolutely clear on this. Without risk, without the willingness to make mistakes, there is no language acquisition. They plateau because safety becomes the enemy of fluency.
But the flip side is also dangerous, isn't it? I think we've all been guilty of this being the nice teacher. You don't want to hurt their feelings. You want to keep the energy up in the room. So you say, good job, excellent, even when the work is actually, mediocre.
You want to be the cheerleader.
You want to be the cheerleader, exactly. But Harmer warns specifically against that. He has a great term for it. He calls it creating praise junkies.
Praise junkies. It's such a visceral image, isn't it?
It really is.
These are students who begin to crave approval rather than actual learning. They're looking for the dopamine hit of the teacher smiling and nodding, rather than the intrinsic satisfaction of mastering a difficult concept.
And what's the long-term damage of that?
Well, if you praise everything, you devalue the praise. It becomes meaningless currency. It's like inflation hitting the classroom economy. If good job is what you say when they just manage to breathe, what do you have left to say when they actually write a perfect, complex sentence?
So how do we avoid that inflation? How do we praise correctly?
The praise has to be specific, and it has to be merited. It has to be tied to a concrete achievement. So, if a student produces a complex sentence structure correctly for the first time, let's say they finally nail a third conditional after struggling with it, that deserves praise.
And specific praise.
Very specific.
Yeah.
Excellent use of the past perfect. That's exactly right. Not just good sentence. But if they just show up to class, open their book, and read a sentence off the page, that doesn't need applause.
Right.
We have to balance that delicacy. And Harmer points out that this variable changes dramatically from student to student. It's not one size fits all.
Right. I've had students who, quite frankly, want me to be a drill sergeant. You know,
Yeah.
usually these are the high-level professionals taking IELTS for migration doctors, engineers. They say, stop me every time I make a mistake. Every single time. I need perfection. Don't worry about my feelings. Worry about my score. They have thick skin.
Exactly. For that kind of student, the language ego is robust. They've separated their professional identity from their learner identity. They view correction as just data efficiency.
But then you have the quieter student, maybe someone younger, or perhaps just someone struggling with confidence, who needs a lot of support and positive reinforcement before they can even begin to handle the critique.
And that's Harmer's core point. We have to read the room. We have to be diagnosticians of personality as much as language. But the most important distinction Harmer makes, and honestly, this is the pillar of our training today, is the difference between correction and responding.
This was a huge aha moment for me reading the notes. It really was. We tend to use these terms interchangeably in the staff room, don't we? I'm going to correct these papers, or I need to give feedback. But Harmer splits them into two fundamentally different actions.
Completely different mindsets.
So let's break down correction first. The fixer mode.
Correction is focused on accuracy. It's all about getting things right.
Mm.
It's typically used for final pieces of work or very specific language drills where the focus is on form. Think of it as binary code. It's a 1 or a 0, right or wrong.
Okay, so like a grammar worksheet?
A grammar worksheet is the perfect example. If you are doing a drill on the present perfect tense and the student uses the past simple, you correct it. You say, no, it's have been, not was. You replace the wrong brick with the right brick.
It's swift. It's efficient. It feels clean.
Yeah.
But what is the limitation? Because on the surface, that sounds like what we're paid to do.
The limitation is that it doesn't teach the student how to edit themselves. It fixes the specific instance of the error, but it doesn't necessarily upgrade the underlying operating system.
Oh.
It's a kind of copy editing service provided by the teacher. And often, and this is the really frustrating part, the student doesn't even notice why it was corrected. They just see the red ink and think, okay, the teacher fixed it. It's an entirely passive experience for the learner. They're just a recipient.
Which brings us to responding. And this is the role of the guide rather than the fixer.
Responding is a completely different ballgame. Responding is reacting to the student's work as a piece of actual communication. It is telling them what you think. It's teasing out alternatives. It's making suggestions. And crucially, Harmer notes this is most vital during the process of writing, during the drafting phase, not just at the very end.
That distinction between process and product is so key. I mean, if I'm only marking the final essay, I'm effectively doing an autopsy. The patient is already dead.
Huh, that's a vivid analogy.
Oh, but it's true. The essay is finished. I can determine the cause of death. Subject-verb agreement failure in paragraph 3, but I can't save the patient. But responding happens while the patient is still on the operating table.
Yes, it holds up. And responding reacts to what is written, the content, the ideas, the argument, not just the grammar or the form. Harmer emphasizes that we need to react to the message first.
So give me an example.
Okay, so a student writes an essay about global warming, and they have this fascinating, really original argument about carbon taxation in developing countries, but their comma usage is a disaster. A corrector only sees the commas. The red pen comes out, commas are inserted everywhere. A responder reads the paragraph and says, wow, this is a really compelling argument about carbon tax. I hadn't thought of it that way. But you know what? I'm losing the thread of your great idea here because the punctuation is breaking up your flow. How could we restructure this to make your point even more powerful?
So you're engaging with their intellect first, not just their syntax. You're treating them as a writer, not just as a language learner.
Precisely. You validate them as a communicator, and that gives them the motivation to fix the syntax so that their brilliant idea can be understood. It shifts the motivation from, I need to please the teacher, to, I need to be understood by the world. And that is a massive, massive psychological shift for a student.
So I'm asking the teachers in this room right now, when you take home that stack of writing task 2 essays tonight, are you correcting or are you responding? Are you just hunting for subject-verb agreement errors like a detective? Or are you actually engaging with the student's logic and their argumentation?
Because we have to remember.
IELTS is not just a grammar test. It's a communication test. If their argument is incoherent, they will fail, no matter how perfect their spelling is.
And that leads us directly, I think, to the concept of the washback effect. This is the framework provided by Brown and Abhiwikrama. If Harmer gives us the micro skills of how to talk to students in the moment.
Brown gives us the macro view of how our assessment affects their entire learning life.
Exactly. It's the long-term consequence of our actions.
Washback, or sometimes it's called backwash. It's a bit of a strange term if you haven't heard it before. Let's really unpack this definition because it is critical for understanding why our students behave the way they do.
In the simplest terms, washback is the effect that testing has on teaching and learning. It's the influence the exam itself exerts on what happens in the classroom weeks or even months before the exam ever takes place.
I like the analogy of a rock thrown into a pond.
That's a great one. The exam is the rock thrown into the pond of learning, the ripples that travel backwards from that impact towards the shore, influencing everything that's washback.
And in the world of IELTS, that rock is not a pebble. It's a boulder. The influence is massive. It's gravitational.
It is. Brown acknowledges that large-scale, standardized tests like IELTS are what he calls gatekeeping tests. And because the stakes are so high, university admission, immigration, professional registration, the test naturally creates very, very strong washback. The curriculum inevitably bends towards the test.
And we see the negative version of this all the time, the dreaded teaching to the test.
Negative washback is exactly that. It's when the curriculum narrows so much that we stop teaching general English competence and we start teaching exam tricks. We see cram courses that focus only on what is measurable on that one Saturday morning.
Things like, don't worry about understanding the reading passage, just scan for the keyword.
Exactly that. It promotes a very specific student attitude that Brown highlights. It's a tragic one. It's the attitude of, woo, I'm glad that's over. Now I don't have to remember any of that stuff.
Ugh, that's heartbreaking to hear as a teacher. It is the tragedy of negative washback. It treats learning as a hurdle to be jumped over and then immediately forgotten. It's the hallmark of purely summative assessment. I got the score, now I can dump this knowledge.
It turns the language into a disposable commodity.
And honestly, it makes our jobs as teachers incredibly boring. It really does. We become factory workers on an assembly line for test takers.
Precisely. And that's because, as you said, it's summative. Summative assessment looks back. It sums up what has been grasped at the end of a unit or a course. It's a product. A final band score is the ultimate summative statement. It just says, you were a 6.5 on this particular day.
Full stop.
Full stop. But Brown argues that our goal, and the goal of what he calls positive or beneficial washback, is to make all of our assessment as formative as possible.
Formative. Forming the competence as you go.
Yes. Formative assessment implies ongoing development. It's a process, not a product. Brown's criteria for positive washback are really fascinating. He says a test provides beneficial washback if it, 1, offers learners a chance to prepare adequately.
Okay, that makes sense.
2, if it provides feedback that actually enhances their language development. And 3, and this is the core of it, if it is more formative in nature than summative.
Okay, but that last part seems tricky for IELTS, doesn't it? The official exam is summative. It is a one-shot deal. You go in, you do the test, you get a number a couple weeks later. You don't get feedback from the IDP or the British Council. You don't get a little note saying, nice use of adjectives in task 2.
Not at all.
You just get a test report form.
Yeah.
So how do we, as teachers in our classrooms, take a summative beast like IELTS and make the experience of preparing for it formative?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Brown says it's all about how we handle the feedback loop. Even a mock exam in your classroom, which looks and feels like a summative test, can be made formative if we change what happens after the timer stops. It's about not letting the grade be the final word.
Okay, let's get into the strategies here. This is where we can really connect Brown and Harmer. How do we turn these tests into learning devices? Because right now, for many of our students, they are just anxiety devices.
Well, Brown makes a beautiful point. He says incorrect responses are windows of insight.
I love that phrasing. Not failures, not mistakes, but windows of insight.
It completely changes the mindset. If a student messes up a listening section, it's not just -1 point. It's a window into a potential phonological problem. Maybe they genuinely can't hear the difference between the NS, or it's a vocabulary gap, or a concentration issue.
It's diagnostic.
It's diagnostic. And because of that, Brown suggests we have to resist the urge to just give a letter grade or a number.
This is a hard habit to break. I mean, our students want the band score. They beg for it. Teacher, please, just tell me, is this a 6 or a 7? If I don't give them a number, they feel cheated. They feel like they didn't get what they paid for.
They do, and that's because they are conditioned to the summative model. They've been trained for years by the education system to want the number. But Brown suggests what he calls a narrative evaluation.
A narrative evaluation.
Instead of, or at least alongside the score, provide written comments on key objectives. He actually has a checklist for teachers to gauge their washback. He asks, is the feedback you're giving relevant to the learning objectives? Do your comments contribute to formative development? And this one is critical. Is class time spent going over the test?
Going over the test. And that doesn't just mean reading out the answer key, does it? Because I've seen that happen. Number 1 is C, number 2 is A, number 3 is C, and you just see the eyes glaze over around the room. It is the death of engagement.
Absolutely not. That's not teaching. Reading the answer key is passive. That's just auditing. Brown is asking, are students given a chance to discuss the results? And this connects directly to the idea of autonomy. We need to create a space for students to feedback on your feedback.
Feedback on the feedback? That sounds a bit meta. What does that look like in a real classroom?
It means the assessment isn't a monologue from teacher to student. It has to be a dialogue.
Yeah.
If you mark an essay and you read a comment like, the logic in this paragraph is flawed, the student should have the space to come back and say, okay, I see that, but what I was trying to say was X.
Ah, so it opens a conversation.
It opens a conversation.
Yeah.
And it takes the pressure off the teacher as a sole omniscient judge and encourages self-assessment and reflection. And Harmer aligns with this perfectly. He says students must not just file away their corrected work. They have to understand why the reaction from the teacher occurred and then attempt to put it right themselves.
If they just look at the grade, shrug, and put the paper in their bag, the washback is 0, or even negative because they just feel defeated.
That's exactly.
You know, this reminds me of the concept of the growth mindset from Carol Dweck, even though she isn't in our sources today. But if the paper just says 5.0, that feels like a fixed label. I am a 5.0. It's static.
It's a judgment on your identity.
Yes. But if the feedback says, here's why this paragraph didn't work for coherence and here's a strategy to fix it, it becomes, I am currently performing at this level, but the path to the next level is visible to me.
Exactly. You provide the map. The score is just the you are here dot on the map. The feedback is the route forward. The great danger of purely summative assessment is that it gives the dot without the map.
I want to make this really tangible. We deal with theory a lot, but let's run a practical scenario. We are all here at IELTS Focus. It's Tuesday afternoon. You've just collected a stack of writing task 2 essays. The topic was the advantages and disadvantages of remote work. A classic IELTS topic.
Okay? Stack of papers. We've all been there. The smell of ink and anxiety.
Let's walk through the wrong way first. The way that creates negative washback and relies on pure mechanical correction. The way, let's be honest, many of us started our careers doing.
The wrong way.
Okay.
The teacher sits alone at a desk with a red pen. It's late at night. They're tired. They've got another class to plan. They read through the first essay.
And what do?
Every time they see a grammar error,
Yeah.
a missing article, a wrong preposition, a spelling mistake, they circle it or they write the correct form directly above it. They are copy editing. They're fixing the language. By the end, the paper looks like it's bleeding red ink.
The Red Sea effect, I've been there. And you feel like you're doing a good job. You feel diligent because you are catching everything.
You feel productive. You feel like you're earning your paycheck. Look at all the mistakes I found. But then at the top of the paper, the teacher writes band 6.0. And maybe a generic comment like, watch your grammar or good effort.
And the next day in class.
The next day, the teacher hands the papers back. The student immediately looks at the 6.0. They feel a spike of emotion, either, yay, I passed my own internal target, or, oh no, I failed. They glance at the sea of red ink. It's overwhelming. They don't understand half of the corrections because they don't know why at was changed to in.
They just know it was wrong.
They just know it was wrong. They fold the paper, put it in their bag, and they never, ever look at it again.
And the total learning value of that entire exercise was
Oh.
nearly zero.
Nearly zero. We measured them, we weighed the pig, but we didn't teach them a single thing about how to write better next time.
In fact, we might have done harm.
We gate-kept them. That's the perfect word for it. We told them which door they couldn't open yet, but we didn't give them the key. And worse, we reinforced the idea that English is just a minefield of potential errors to be avoided, rather than a beautiful tool for communication. We taught them to be afraid of the blank page.
Okay, now let's flip it. Same scenario, same stack of papers, the right way. The way that utilizes Harmer's responding and maximizes Brown's positive washback. And this requires a shift in workflow. It's not just about being nicer. It's about being smarter.
Absolutely. And this starts before the essay is even finished. If possible, Harmer suggests intervening during the drafting phase. So while the students are writing in class, the teacher is circulating. You are not sitting at your desk answering emails. You are looking over shoulders.
Being a guide in real time.
You look at a student's first paragraph, and you say, I see your point here about flexibility, but how does this connect to the thesis statement in your introduction?
That's responding. You're not talking about grammar yet. You're interrogating the content, the logic, while the cement is still wet. You can actually change the trajectory of the whole essay.
Exactly. You are guiding the process. You are preventing the structural error before it becomes a habit.
But okay, let's say you have to take the papers home. You can't catch everyone in class. Now you're marking them. What's the first rule?
Brown's rule. No naked scores. No naked scores. I love that. If you are going to give a score, it must be closed in specific, actionable feedback. Brown suggests breaking it down by the assessment criteria.
So not just 6.0.
No. You write something like, task response, excellent. You addressed all parts of the question, band 7 level. Coherence and cohesion. This is the area of challenge. Your paragraphs don't link logically, band 5 level. Vocabulary, strong range, band 7 level.
So the student can see that they aren't just a 6. They are a complex profile of strengths and weaknesses. It gives them a specific target. It says, keep doing what you're doing with vocabulary, but we need to focus all our energy on coherence.
That's a roadmap. And what about the red ink? The grammar. Do we just ignore it?
No, but you use it sparingly. And you use it strategically. So instead of fixing the error directly, you give a hint. You promote autonomy.
Give me an example of a hint.
So if the student keeps making the same tense errors over and over in paragraph 2, don't fix all 5 of them. You draw a bracket around the paragraph and write a note in the margin. Check the tense consistency in this paragraph. You are switching between past and present. Find the errors and fix them.
You're forcing them to do the cognitive work. You're making them the editor.
Yes, you are training the editor that lives in their brain. Because in the real exam, you won't be there with a red pen to fix it for them. They need to develop the skill of self-correction. If you always fix it for them, you are robbing them of the chance to learn how to fix it themselves.
And then, the most important part, the part that most teachers skip because of time pressure.
The review session.
The review session. You don't just hand the papers back and say, okay, next unit, and move on. You spend 20 minutes of the next class discussing common patterns. You say, okay, everyone, I noticed that about half of you struggled with the transition between the second and third paragraph. Let's look at 3 anonymous examples from your work on the board, and let's rewrite them together right now.
That turns the test into a lesson. It collectivizes the struggle. The student thinks, oh, thank goodness, I'm not the only one who messed this up. It removes the shame.
And finally, the second chance. The assessment isn't over. Brown emphasizes this so strongly. The student is encouraged, or maybe even required, to rewrite one paragraph based on the feedback you gave them.
And that's what transforms the test from a product, a thing that is done and finished, to a process, a piece of work that is still evolving.
If they rewrite that paragraph and they fix the coherence problem, they have learned. They have consolidated the skill. Positive washback achieved. Mission accomplished.
No, I can hear the teachers thinking it right now. I can feel it. This sounds like more work. Writing all those comments takes longer. Doing a review session takes time. I don't have time for second drafts. I have to get through the syllabus.
And it's a valid concern. It does require more effort in the short term, perhaps. Writing detailed narrative comments takes longer than just writing 6.0. But the efficiency gain in the long term is undeniable because the student actually stops making those same mistakes week after week.
You're breaking the cycle.
You're breaking the cycle. If you just correct the same third person's error for a student in week 1, and you're still correcting it in week 10, you are on a hamster wheel of your own making. If you use these formative techniques to teach them to self-correct, you eventually work yourself out of that specific job, which is the goal of teaching.
This is a fundamental shift for many of us, I think. We are conditioned by our own schooling to be graders. In some contexts, we are paid to be graders. But we need to become trainers. We need to stop acting like the police and start acting like the coach.
The goal is not the score itself. The score is just a byproduct. It's a symptom. The goal is the competence gained in chasing the score. If we focus on building the competence, brick by brick, the score will take care of itself. We need to trust the process.
So here's the challenge for you, the teachers listening to this. I want you to look at your role. When you walk into that classroom tomorrow, what hat are you wearing? Are you a gatekeeper, simply standing there with a clipboard telling students which door they can't open yet? Sorry, you're a 5.5. Try again next term. Or are you a guide? Are you the person showing them how to find the key? Are you walking the path with them?
I think feedback is ultimately an act of empathy. It's saying, I see where you are and I see where you want to go, and I believe you can get there. Here's the first step. It's not just about English. It's about empowerment. It's about giving the student control and agency over their own learning.
Go back to your classrooms. Look at that stack of papers on your desk. Put the red pen down for a second. Pick up a green one if you have to, or just a simple pencil. And think about how you can turn those tests into lessons. That is the art of feedback. That is your mission. Now let's get to work.
Indeed. Let's go and make every error a window of insight. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are stripping away the myths about talent and natural ability in language learning. We're looking at the invisible machinery that really determines whether a student fails or flies. We're focusing on something we're calling educational strategy.
And before you think this is, just for teachers, it's really not.
No, not at all. This is actually about high-stakes performance. It's about the intersection of psychology, architecture, and, well, gatekeeping.
It's a fascinating area because it forces us to connect two worlds that usually sit at completely opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right.
On one side, you've got the very human, sort of organic art of lesson planning, how we actually build knowledge in a messy human brain.
And on the other, you have the cold, hard, metric-driven reality of standardized testing.
Exactly.
It's like the difference between growing a garden and measuring a harvest with a laser scanner.
That's a great way to put it.
And our mission for this deep dive is to analyze a strategy we're calling IELTS FOCUS. We're going to break down how a teacher prevents a class from becoming this chaotic pile of what our source calls unrelated scraps.
And how that specific organization, that architecture, really determines whether a student passes a massive life-altering exam like the IELTS.
To do that, we're leaning on two absolute heavyweights in the field.
We are. We've got Jeremy Harmer's How to Teach English, which is, it's basically the Bible for pedagogy and planning frameworks. And we're pairing that with Brown and Abby Wickerma's language assessment principles, which breaks down the science of how we measure all that learning.
So here's the central question we're grappling with today. How do you take a messy human process like learning language, with all its variables, all its emotions, and structure it so that it stands up to the brutal scrutiny of a proficiency test?
It has to start with the architecture. If the foundation is weak, the whole house falls down when the inspector comes knocking.
Okay, let's jump right into that foundation then. Section 1, the architecture of planning. We're looking at Harmer here. Now, when I hear lesson plan, my mind immediately goes to a script. I imagine a teacher walking in with a paper that says 9000, say hello, 9:02 a.m., tell a joke. But Harmer seems to think that's a complete disaster waiting to happen.
He absolutely does. Harmer defines a lesson plan not as a script, but as a proposal for action. And that's a really key philosophical distinction.
Proposal for action.
Yeah. If you treat it like a script, you're assuming that the 30 humans in front of you are actors who have memorized their lines.
And they haven't. They're unpredictable.
They haven't. So if you script it and a student asks a question you didn't see coming, the whole play just falls apart.
You freeze up.
Exactly, you freeze. But a proposal for action implies flexibility. It implies you can adapt.
But, and this feels like the important part, just because it's flexible doesn't mean it's optional.
Right. Harmer is very clear on this. A plan is absolutely necessary for two very distinct reasons. The first one is for the teacher.
Okay.
It acts as a safety net.
I love that image. the high-wire act of teaching.
It really is. In a classroom, chaos is always just around the corner. You might get distracted, the projector might die, a student might have a breakdown. If you're just winging it, if you're just relying on your charisma or, your magic moments, that's where you crash and burn.
The plan gives you something to fall back on.
It gives you a framework, a destination. You might have to take a detour because the class gets really excited about something, a magic moment, as he calls it. But the plan ensures you know where you're eventually heading.
Okay, so that's for the teacher. What's the second reason?
The second is for the student. And Harmer mentions something here that I think applies to any leadership role, not just teaching. He talks about the plan as a signal of professionalism.
It's about building trust.
It's all about trust. Students are incredibly intuitive. They can tell almost instantly if a teacher's just making it up as they go along.
I've definitely been in those classes.
We all have. Harmer notes that even just the physical evidence of a plan, seeing the teacher glance at their notes, shows the student that this person has devoted time to thinking about them before the class even started.
It builds a bond. It shows you care.
It shows commitment. A lack of a plan suggests a lack of commitment. And if I don't trust that you know where we're going, I'm certainly not going to follow you.
Especially not when you're learning a language, which is such a vulnerable, scary thing to do.
Precisely. That trust is everything.
But there's a tension here, isn't there? We want structure, but we don't want rigidity. Harmer talks about this battle between coherence and variety. Let's unpack that because it feels like the core design challenge.
It is the tightrope walk. Yeah. So let's look at coherence first. The human brain craves patterns. It looks for them everywhere. So students need to see a logical link. Activity A has to connect somehow to activity B. If you have them listen to a really somber audio track about climate change, and then suddenly, with no transition, you switch to a grammar drill about the present perfect tense using sentences about shopping.
Yeah.
The lesson is just incoherent.
It feels like channel surfing, just random disconnected inputs.
Exactly. It feels like those unrelated scraps. The brain can't file the information because there's no folder for climate change/shopping grammar. It just doesn't compute.
But if you focus only on that coherence, you run into the second problem, which is boredom.
The enemy of engagement.
Right.
This is where variety comes in. Harmer gives a pretty brutal example of a class doing a 45-minute drill.
Oh, that sounds like torture.
Imagine it, just doing the same type of cognitive task, fill in the blank, fill in the blank, fill in the blank for nearly an hour.
I would just tune out completely.
You would. It destroys engagement. Even if that drill is perfectly logical and coherent, the human brain disengages if the stimulus doesn't change. We just stop paying attention to the pattern.
So the ideal plan has this internal coherence, this logical flow, but it moves you through different types of activities.
Yes. You might start with a high-energy game, then move to a quiet reading period, then to a loud, chaotic discussion. Different energies, different parts of the brain being used, but there's one logical thread holding it all together.
Okay, that brings us to what I think is maybe the most useful concept in this whole section, the lesson thread.
This is a concept Harmer cites from a writer named Tessa Woodward, and it's the perfect antidote to those unrelated scraps.
What is a thread?
A thread is a connection that runs through a sequence of lessons. It's what links your Monday class to your Friday class. It's the through line.
And Harmer breaks this down into 3 types, right?
He does. You have topic threads, where the subject matter continues. You have language threads, where a specific grammar point or vocabulary set recurs. And you have skill threads, where something like reading or listening is developed over time.
I want to make this really concrete for our listeners.
Yeah.
Harmer provides this great specific example of a week-long sequence that involves a cat thread.
Yes.
I want to walk through this day by day because it really shows how this weaving actually works to build memory.
It's a textbook example of interconnectivity. It's beautiful, really.
Okay, so we start on Monday. The teacher introduces animals' vocabulary, specifically parts of a cat's body. Whiskers, paws, tail, claws. Some simple stuff.
Right, standard vocabulary acquisition. But if you stop there, the curve of forgetting kicks in immediately, and by Wednesday, maybe half those words are just gone.
So Tuesday comes around. The plan reviews those words, but it adds a new layer. This would be a language thread, right? You start doing cat metaphors.
Exactly. Let the cat out of the bag. Raining cats and dogs. Now just stop and think about what's happening here. You're teaching a new concept, metaphorical language, but you're anchoring it to the vocabulary from Monday.
You're doubling the neural connections.
You're strengthening the original memory by attaching something new to it.
Then Wednesday, There's another review, of course, but now we start fish vocabulary.
And why fish? Because cats eat fish. The topic expands naturally. It's associative learning, which is how our brains work anyway.
Thursday is interesting. Thursday introduces a reading thread.
Uh-huh. They start a graded reader, a simple book, and of course, the story's probably about a cat or an animal adventure of some kind.
So now the student is seeing the words from Monday and the concepts from Tuesday, but inside a real narrative context.
Which is another layer of reinforcement.
And finally, Friday. They do an oral summary of that reader. They have to talk about the book.
So by the end of the week, just look at the architecture. You haven't just memorized a random list of words. You have parts of the body, you have metaphors, you have a related animal group, a reading text, and a speaking activity, all connected by this single cat thread.
It's like building a web. If you pull on one part of it, the whole thing moves.
That's the goal. That interconnectivity is what moves information from short-term memory, which is frankly useless for a big exam, into long-term retention. It creates what you might call global competence instead of just isolated skills.
Global competence. I want you to put a pin in that phrase because I have a feeling that is going to be the absolute key when we start talking about the IELTS later on.
Oh, it is.
But before we get to the exam room, we need to look at the engine of the lesson itself. We have the threads connecting the days, but what happens inside that 1 hour? Harmer uses an acronym, ESA.
Engage, study, activate. ESA is the engine. And Harmer argues that for successful language learning to actually happen, all three of these elements must be present. You cannot skip one.
Okay, let's break the engine down piece by piece. O, engage. This feels like the heart part of the equation.
It is. It's the emotional component.
Yeah.
Harmer is very clear on this. If students are switched off, or if they're not curious, learning simply fails. It doesn't happen.
It doesn't matter how good the lesson is.
Doesn't matter. You can have the most brilliant explanation of grammar in the world, but if the student is emotionally flat or bored or just thinking about what's for lunch, that information just bounces right off them.
So engage is about arousal,
Yeah.
about getting their attention.
It's about involving both the mind and the heart. It's the hook. It's why you might start a lesson on crime vocabulary with a fascinating picture of a bank robbery or a really controversial question about justice.
Rather than just writing page 45 on the board.
Exactly. You have to open the door before you can walk into the room.
Okay, the door is open. Now we move to SIST study. This is the part I remember most from school, the classic learning.
Yes, this is the construction phase. This is where you focus on the forms of the language. Grammar rules, specific vocabulary, pronunciation, discourse markers.
It is analytical.
Very. You're taking the language apart to see how it works. But here's where most, let's say, less effective classes stop, right?
Right. They engage, maybe, if the teacher is fun and they study, but they miss A.
They miss A. Activate. And this is the critical failure point in so many curriculums. Activate is the performance phase. This is where students use the language freely.
Okay, define freely for us. What does that mean in practice?
It means the focus isn't on accuracy anymore. It's on communication. It's not a drill where there's only one right answer. It's a discussion, a role play, a debate, a writing task where they have to express their own genuine opinion. Harmer calls this the rehearsal for real life.
And why is this so important for the brain? I mean, why can't we just study the rules and know them?
Because language is a skill, not just a body of knowledge. Activate allows for what he calls mental processing. When a student tries to use the language to actually communicate a complex idea, they're wiring that knowledge into their brain in a way that just studying a rule on a page never, ever achieves.
It moves it from passive knowledge to active knowledge.
That's the perfect way to put it, from stuff I recognize to stuff I can actually use. If you leave out activate, the student might know the rule for the past tense, but they can't actually tell you what they did yesterday.
Now, Harmer also talks about how you sequence these. The classic model is straight arrows, right?
Right. Engage, then study, then activate. ESA. It's linear. You get them interested, you teach them the rule, and then they use the rule. It's logical, and it's especially great for beginners.
He also mentions boomerang and patchwork. These
Yeah.
sound a bit more chaotic.
They're more sophisticated, yeah. In a boomerang sequence, you might engage them and then go straight to an activate task.
Before you teach them how.
Before you teach them how, you say, okay, you're two business partners, negotiate this deal, go.
And they fail, presumably.
Well, they struggle. They realize, oh, I don't know the polite way to say no, or how do I make a counteroffer? That struggle creates a knowledge gap.
Ah, I see.
Then you go to the study phase to fill in that specific gap they just experienced. And then you activate again, and this time they're much more successful.
So the study phase becomes the solution to a problem they just felt themselves.
Exactly. It makes the learning incredibly sticky and relevant. But the key takeaway from Harmer isn't about the order. It's that all three elements, E, S, and A, must be present somewhere in the lesson. If you just have study, you have that 45-minute drill, and the learning just dies on the mind.
Okay, so that's the classroom strategy. We have our threads for the long game, the week-to-week plan, and we have ESA for the daily engine. Now, let's pivot. We're leaving the safe, planned environment of the classroom and entering the high-pressure world of the exam room.
Yes.
We're bringing in our second source, Prananeve Wickrama.
This is the shift from how do we teach to how do we measure. And this is where things get really serious because the metrics of testing are, frankly, what drives the entire educational industry.
So Brown starts by breaking down the landscape of tests.
Yeah.
He talks about placement tests first.
Right. A placement test has a very specific utilitarian job to place a student into a particular level of a curriculum. It's the sorting hat from Harry Potter.
It's administrative.
It is. It shouldn't be too easy, or the student will be bored in class. It shouldn't be too difficult, or they'll be completely discouraged from day one.
But Brown argues that a good placement test isn't just administrative. He says it has a side effect that is actually a secret weapon for teachers.
Yes, the diagnostic role. This is so crucial. If you design your placement test well, it doesn't just give you a label like this student is level B1. It tells you this student is level B1, but look, they got nearly every single reading comprehension question wrong. By tallying the correct and incorrect responses, the teacher gets a head start. They know before the first day of class what the specific weaknesses of that group are.
Which links right back to our lesson threads from Harmer.
Perfectly.
If the diagnostic shows the whole class is weak in reading, the teacher doesn't just blindly follow the textbook. They consciously weave a reading thread into the weekly plan from day one.
Exactly. The test informs the plan. It's a feedback loop. But then we move to what you called the big league of testing, the proficiency test.
This is where we talk about the real gatekeepers. Brown mentions the giants, TOEFL, IELTS, PTE, MELEB. These aren't just tests, they're like passport stamps.
They are, and they are fundamentally different from a test you take at the end of a semester. An achievement test, which is what you take in school, checks, did you learn what was in Chapter 4?
It's curriculum-based.
It is. A proficiency test, on the other hand, checks global competence.
There's that phrase again, global competence. What's the key distinction here? What makes a proficiency test so different?
A proficiency test is not limited to any specific course or curriculum or textbook. It tests...
The IELTS examiner doesn't care if you learned English at Harvard or by watching YouTube videos in your bedroom.
Not one bit. They only care about one thing. Can you perform? Can you use the language in an academic or professional setting?
And you said these tests are gatekeepers.
That is the term Brown uses, and it's dead-on accurate. They act as the mechanism for accepting or denying passage to a university or to a profession or even for immigration. The stakes are incredibly high.
Which means they have to be comprehensive.
They have to be. Traditionally, they were just multiple choice grammar and vocabulary, but now the big commercial tests almost always include a writing sample and an oral production sample, a speaking test.
Okay, so let's connect the dots. This is section 4 of our deep dive, where we bring Harmer and Brown together. We have this IELTS focus strategy. How does the architecture of planning, the threads, the ESA model, how does that actually solve the massive problem of the proficiency test?
Well, think about that challenge of global competence. The IELTS checks everything. It checks your ability to connect ideas, to speak fluently for 2 minutes, to understand subtle nuance in a reading passage.
Right.
If your classes have just been those unrelated scraps, a bit of grammar on Monday, a list of vocab on Tuesday, the student is relying entirely on short-term memory.
They might pass the quiz on Friday, but they're going to get destroyed on the IELTS in 6 months.
Exactly, because the IELTS requires deep, long-term retention. And this is where Harmer's lesson threads come in. That cat example, that's a perfect microcosm of how you build global competence.
So?
By forcing students to retain and connect information over days and weeks, linking the vocabulary to the metaphor, to the story, to the discussion, you are building a robust, interconnected network of knowledge in their brain.
You're training the brain to access that information globally.
Which is exactly what the proficiency test demands. You're not just recalling a list, you're using a web of knowledge.
And what about the ESA model? How does that specific engine prepare a student for a gatekeeping exam?
Oh, it's directly mapped to the components of the test. Think about it. The study phase handles the specific criteria. It gives you the grammar rules and the specific vocabulary range that the IELTS examiners are literally grading you on.
That's the science.
That's the science. But activate is the game changer.
Because of the speaking and writing sections.
Precisely. If a teacher runs a class that is only study, only drills and grammar explanations, the student has never practiced producing a free speech sample or writing a timed writing assignment.
You can know all the rules of driving, but if you've never actually driven on a highway, you're going to fail the driving test.
That's the perfect analogy. Activate is the rehearsal. It's the simulation of the test environment, but in a safe space.
So it's about building the muscle memory for performance.
Right. And the stamina. The IELTS is a marathon. It's hours long. You need the cognitive stamina to keep speaking coherently and writing clearly, even when you're tired and stressed. Activation activities like debates and presentations build that stamina week after week.
Speaking of stamina, Brown brings up a major factor in testing that we haven't touched on yet: anxiety.
Yes, the psychological component. Proficiency tests produce massive amounts of stress. It's a high-pressure, high-stakes environment. And Brown is very clear. Stress impacts performance. It can literally shut down the language centers of the brain.
So how on earth does a lesson plan help with anxiety? That seems like a bit of a stretch.
It's not, actually. Think about Harmer's engage phase. If a student is emotionally involved, if they're curious and enjoying the process in the classroom, they build confidence. They build a positive association with the language itself.
Okay, that makes sense.
But even more importantly, the lesson plan itself, the very existence of it, acts as an anxiety reducer.
Because they trust the teacher, like we said before.
Because of the structure. If a student sees that the teacher has a plan, a proposal for action that is professional and coherent, it reduces their classroom anxiety. They feel safe. They know they're being prepared properly.
And that psychological safety in the classroom.
It builds the resilience they need when they finally have to walk into that exam room all alone. They have the confidence that they've done the work, that they've been trained for this.
And we can't forget the diagnostic loop we talked about, using Brown's idea of the placement test to inform Harmer's lesson threads.
That is the ultimate strategic loop. If the placement test shows a weakness in reading, you don't just hope it gets better. You actively weave a reading thread into your weekly plan immediately. You use the data from the assessment side, Brown, to architect the planning side, Harmer.
You're constantly adjusting the strategy to target the gatekeeper.
Constantly.
So to wrap this up, we've gone from the absolute micro level, a specific lesson thread about the parts of a cat, all the way to the macro level of passing a gatekeeping proficiency test like the IELTS.
And the key takeaway is that these are not separate worlds. You don't just teach for 6 months and then test at the end. The way you plan your teaching, balancing coherence and variety, using threads, ensuring constant activation, is the direct preparation for the measurement of global competence.
A passing score isn't just about how hard the student crams the week before the test.
No, not at all. A passing score is the final result of a teacher's well-designed proposal for action. It's the result of a plan that balanced logic with variety and ensured the student was not just studying the language, but constantly activating it. The teacher's architecture is what allows the student to walk through that gate.
That puts a tremendous amount of power and responsibility in the hands of the planner, the teacher.
It does. It elevates lesson planning from, just filling out a form for your boss to the act of designing a student's future.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to mull over. We've established that proficiency tests measure global competence, regardless of the curriculum. The IELTS doesn't care if you studied cats or business English or Shakespeare. It just measures the skill. So here's the question. Does that mean the specific content of the lesson plan matters less than the method used to teach it? If the method, the ESA engine, the lesson threads is strong,
Được thành lập 2018 bởi nhóm giáo viên đã có nhiều năm công tác tại các trung tâm lớn uy tín ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. THEIELTSFOCUS không chỉ có các bạn học viên giỏi là các bạn tiến sĩ, bác sĩ, nghiên cứu sinh, các bạn học trường chuyên, mà còn có các bạn học sinh lớp thường đạt được điểm số IELTS và TOEIC cao nhờ vào phát triển được năng lực tiếng Anh thực thụ. Khác biệt với các trung tâm lớn, đông đúc, dùng chung một quyển giáo trình rập khuôn cho hàng ngàn học viên, lúc đi thi gây nhàm chán cho giám khảo chấm điểm. Đa số các chương trình online hay học trực tiếp tại thành phố Hồ Chí Minh của THEIELTS FOCUS chỉ tầm 3 đến 7 học viên, dễ dàng theo sát các bạn, giúp tối đa hóa điểm số nhờ tích hợp nhiều phương pháp trong suốt quá trình giảng dạy. 100% lớp học luyện đề được hướng dẫn bởi thầy Quốc Khánh, IELTS 8.5, Reading 9.0, Listening 9.0 và không có ban điểm nào dưới 8. Các bạn có thể theo học tại quận 6, quận 2, quận 9 và quận 11. Nếu các bạn ở xa, có thể chọn hình thức học online, giáo viên vẫn có thể theo sát được các bạn vì sĩ số lớp vừa phải.
Waves rolling in so slow. Trust the tide, let go. Ooh, yeah. Deep blue, take me home. Feel the calm in my soul. Stars above guide me right. Moonlight whispers through the night. Ocean